to order. I've asked the attaché Nancy to take a silent roll. We have some absent who are excused. We have no minutes to go over today. I'm going to start with a little bit of a personal privilege on these more controversial or emotional bills. So I'm just going to go through a few things, and some of you are testifying for the first time, so listen up. The Capitol had several IT issues yesterday for people trying to sign up online. I have no control over that, but they got that under control, so people all should have been able to sign up. But it took a while. It wasn't running properly when it was first noticed up, this bill. Before us, we have one bill hearing that may take some time. It's a bill, again, that can bring up emotions. And I ask that when you testify, it's okay to be nervous, but keep emotions under control. It's reported to me that by some of my committee members, though I haven't experienced it myself, that lobbyists on both sides of this bill have been rude and somewhat threatening. Stop that. It's my intention to not vote on this bill today, but to hear testimony, and we will vote on Tuesday, our next business day. I think with the number that have signed up to testify, that we can get through everyone's testimony today. I'll do a check at about 2 hours and see how we're doing. Now, there's a tendency for testimony to get cumulative. So if you're way down the list when you get called and 3 people have said the same thing that you're going to say, it's okay to stand up and say, I like that last witness's testimony and I support that, or I'm against the bill or for it. That's all you need to say, so that we can move along and get everyone here to testify today if possible. That is my goal. And we will take a break, a comfort break, partway through this morning. I think about 2 hours if we stay on task and committee members don't ask too many questions. We're not going to allow cross-examination by committee members. When you're testifying, that's not allowed at any time, cross-examination. They'll be limited in the number of questions that they can ask, and I'll stop it if it gets too long. But our goal is to get all the information we can out of each of you that is helpful to us as a committee to make a decision on this important bill. When you testify, you have 2 minutes to testify. When you come up, please state your name, where you're from, and who you represent. If you're a lobbyist, you need to say who you represent clearly so that we can all understand, and make your name clear so that my clerk can take it down properly. To maintain order, there are no demonstrations of any kind, no flashing signs up, that type of thing, or our good state trooper will have you removed. The presenters will have an aggregate of 10 minutes to present. There's 2 of them, as my understanding today. They can divide that up however they like. All questions from the committee members will be held until the end of testimony for the presenters. And the reason is, I think a lot of our questions may be answered by some of the presenters that are going to be here today on both sides of the issue. Let's see. All right, with that, H406 is properly before the committee. We have some presenters. Both of you can come up and sit in the chairs and take your turns if that's what you plan to do. Please state your name clearly, where you're from, who you are, and what you know.
Morning, Chairman and Committee. I'm Ted Hill, District 14, Eagle and Emmett. Before us today, Bill 406, Fentanyl Trafficking and Drug-Induced Homicide. I wanted to start out with the discussion on fentanyl. Fentanyl is a scourge on America. It's a scourge on our families, our communities in this state. The DEA estimates fentanyl is the biggest drug threat this country's faced in its history. Last year, 110,000 people died of drug overdoses. 70% of those were from fentanyl. Fentanyl is uniquely toxic and dangerous. It's 50,000 times more potent than heroin. It only takes 2 milligrams of fentanyl to be lethal. 2 milligrams is 5 grains of salt. 5 grains of salt. And these are primarily put in pills, and these pills are made in Mexico in a warehouse with probably questionable criteria and pharmaceutical level, but 1 or 2% error in these pills can make it lethal. So this is the problem. The DA estimates, they did samples of these pills. 60% of them were potentially lethal. Well, these pills are out there everywhere. This is the big threat we have. This does cross all socioeconomic boundaries. My nephew died from a fentanyl overdose in 2016. but he was a drug addict. He was a heroin addict. But here last month in Virginia, they had 3 kids have overdoses in 2 days in a high school. So understand, everybody here in this room faces this threat. It's not just to those guys in the street corner. It's in your families. It's at the high schools, at the junior highs. They spread these pills around. This pill is literally Russian roulette. It's thrown out, it's a grenade into the room. So someone, hey, I got this pile of pills. They take one of those. It's one of those pills that weren't measured. The kid dies. That's this threat. The purpose of this bill is to give law enforcement, and we got a lot here, to give them the tools they need to go after this. They need decisive laws to put this down, shut this threat down. Serious laws like this are deterrents. We'll talk to some of these law enforcement, they'll say this. Talk to some of these people, these criminals. They don't want to come to Idaho for other crimes, for heroin and so forth. But you put serious ramifications, you put some serious hit on this, they won't come here to traffic in Idaho. People want to defend the border. Well, we can't defend the border, the southern border. We sure can, heck, defend our border here in Idaho. Make it so no one wants to cross into this state and traffic or deal in fentanyl. I have a couple data points. They're really important. From 2020 to 23, dose units seized in Idaho by law enforcement increased 2,638%. Idaho just passed the threshold this month, January 11th, as a hotspot alert for overdoses. It's coming here, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, it's coming here in a big way. Fentanyl is coming to Idaho. That's a huge point. Now, I looked at this report. They showed 7 states. They're all like Chicago and Atlanta, and Ada County was in there. So this is the new hotspot. This is really a threat. Most important thing, survey came out, 86% of Idaho voters support this bill. 86% support serious penalties on fentanyl and trafficking. That's a pretty serious number for our voters. Idahoans want this. Trafficking fentanyl and mandatory sentences, some of the discussion points. Trafficker is a person knowingly manufactures, delivers, or brings into Idaho fentanyl, or knowingly in actual constructive possession. The key is about that knowingly, it's very precise. There's not going to be the accidental, oh, I had 50 pills, 100 pills, 1,000 pills, I didn't know. It'll be very clear for this trafficker that we know. We have to prove it without all reasonable doubt. The prosecution has to prove that person knowingly had that source of fentanyl. The thresholds are right now 100 pills or 4 grams up to 14 grams, 100 to 250 pills. That's the first threshold. That's for 3 years and $10,000 fine. Next threshold, 14 grams to 28 grams, 250 to 500 pills, 5 years, 15,000. Third, greater than 28 grams to 500 pills, 10 years, $25,000 fine. Maximum is life, $100,000 fine. The threshold for conviction is very high. Prosecutor has to prove without absolutely clearly this person knowingly had those pills. You have 1,000 pills, you know you have it, it's in your trunk, because you did not know it was a trunk. If you did not know it was put there by someone else, they will track the person who is involved with that. They will find the level and find where that person is. The trafficker is very clear, is very precise on what has to happen to meet the trafficking threshold. Key to this bill is we need to give law enforcement the tools they need. They need these tools, decisive tools, to stop this threat. They need to make it so operations are difficult here in Idaho and shut down the cartels. You read about the cartels, they hear about operations in Idaho being difficult, they won't come to Idaho. That's what we want. If you want to scare away the cartels, you want to scare away the scumbags, have some laws, put some teeth into it, we'll scare them away. Second part, drug-induced homicide. This is the second part of the deterrence. Heavy deterrence for traffickers, heavy deterrence on dealers. So anybody who provides an illegal controlled substance and that person dies, that person is liable for homicide. Very specific to pick on the dealers. I talked to the DEA in California. They do this all the time. The local county sheriffs doesn't have the power to do that because they don't have any enforcement capability. But the DEA has federal laws, and they go after them, and they're very effective. They track the cell phones, they go up the chain, they find that dealer who provided those pills. That's who they're looking for. They're looking for the dealer who is distributing these pills. That's the focus. Bottom line, this bill, we need to support this bill. This is about law enforcement. We support law enforcement as a team here, or we support the drug dealers and the cartels.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Lakey, identify yourself and tell us what you know. You have 3.5 minutes.
I'll do my best. Mr. Chairman and committee members, Todd Lakey, State Senator from District 23, and it's an honor to be in front of your committee, Mr. Chairman. Idaho is a great place to live and raise a family, and part of the reason it's a great place to live is because of our low crime rate. We have really safe communities in Idaho. People are fleeing Oregon and Washington and California to come to Idaho. If you've been to Portland or Seattle or San Francisco or even Ontario, it's pretty clear why. Part of the reason Idaho is great is because we have made strong, clear policies that we don't support drug dealers by making it easier for them to do business in the state of Idaho. Specifically, we have mandatory minimum sentences for those participating in drug trafficking in Idaho. We have drug dealers on tape declining to do business in Idaho because of the mandatory minimum sentences. They know about those sentences and they don't want those consequences. Currently, we have mandatory minimum sentencing for those that traffic in dealer quantities in marijuana, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin. And Mr. Chairman, heroin used to be the worst of the worst. But fentanyl literally exponentially surpasses heroin in lethality. 2 milligrams is a potential lethal dose, you've heard that. We have our deterrent and our line of defense for trafficking in heroin, and methamphetamine and cocaine. We do not have that same deterrent, that same line of defense against fentanyl in Idaho. And with that break in our defense, fentanyl is pouring through it. Fentanyl is a scourge. We have more and more coming into Idaho, and the number of fentanyl deaths is rapidly increasing each year. Our undercover officers even say it's hard to find heroin because fentanyl is replacing it. Fentanyl is cheaper to make, much more powerful in smaller amounts, and we have no trafficking statute for fentanyl. It's not rocket science why fentanyl is increasing so rapidly. Our officers have to carry Narcan to save those they come in contact with and save fellow officers that may come in contact with fentanyl. In Idaho, we back the blue. Our law enforcement has been pleading for this drug trafficking statute for at least 3 years. This bill uses the same structural enforcement language that we have in place for methamphetamine, for heroin, and for cocaine. The quantities are different, but in this case, we know there's no question what we're talking about are dealer quantities. 100 to 250 pills is the initial threshold. 4 grams of fentanyl, if 2 milligrams is a lethal dose, a potentially lethal dose, that's 2,000 potentially lethal doses in our minimum tier. We're talking about dealers, we're not talking about users. Drug trafficking is not a nonviolent crime. Dealers are selling a deadly poison to others that they know will ruin their life, ruin their family, ruin their employment, and can take their life. Drugs like meth, coke, and heroin certainly can and do cause overdose and death, but fentanyl is a whole new level. And this bill, as was mentioned, adds a section for drug-induced homicide because these drugs do kill. There's a reason that 86% of Idahoans and our constituents support adding fentanyl to the mandatory trafficking statutes. It's time to act. It's time to act to protect and support the people of Idaho.
We need to wrap up, Senator. Thank you.
One more sentence, Mr. Chairman. It's time to act to support our law enforcement and pass House Bill 406 to help stem the flood of fentanyl in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll call you up at the end of testimony. Okay, we have a system here, and I'm the slowest IT guy in the building. So I click on, it's true, I click on the names. Hopefully it's all going to work right. And I have a helper behind me if I mess up too badly. So I'll call you up, I'll tell you who's on deck, and then your name will appear up here, and the timer will start. I'll probably start it after you say your name. So first up will be Mike Pahanka, and next will be Tracy Bastrachia. Mike Pahanka? Thank you. Hold on, Mr. Ponca. Please state your name, tell us where you're from, and if you represent anyone.
Yeah, Chairman Skog, Mike Pohanka from Jerome, and I'm representing myself.
Go ahead.
Honorable members of legislature, I stand before you today in strong support of implementing a mandatory minimum sentence for the illegal trafficking of fentanyl in Idaho. One of the alarming aspects of this crisis is the deceptive appearance of fentanyl. It is being manufactured in colorful pill forms resembling innocent candies, which can attract young children who are unaware of the danger they hold. Moreover, traffickers are lacing marijuana and cocaine with this deadly substance, intensifying the high for users which remain oblivious to its presence. I have recently had the opportunity to engage with law enforcement agencies, including the Jerome Police Department, Jerome County Sheriff's Office, Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office, and the Idaho State Police. Recent seizure in the city of Jerome in a home seized 600 fentanyl pills, while on a traffic stop, a Jerome County deputy led to 3 pounds of fentanyl. Twin Falls County Sheriff's Office seized a staggering 6,806 grams over the past year and a half, with an additional 400 pills that they seized just this week on a traffic stop. Idaho State Police District 4 seized over 36,000 fentanyl pills. Further, I held a discussion with a respected judge regarding the implementation of a mandatory minimum sentence for fentanyl-related offenses. His experience perspective reinforced the urgent need for such measures and emphasized that Idaho must hold these traffickers accountable. It is crucial to recognize these operations are linked to powerful cartels, and we can send them a strong message through the mandatory minimum sentence. Our commitment to protecting our citizens is mandatory. The implementation of mandatory minimum sentence for fentanyl aligns with the vision of Governor Little's Operation Esto Perpetua, which aims to protect our families and communities. Let us stand united in our commitment to combating this crisis and ensuring a safer future for all Idahoans.
You'll need
I
to
thank
wrap
you
up.
for your consideration.
Well, that was almost right on. And Mr. Pahanka, you were the first one to sign up, so congratulations on that. And you came all the way from Jerome. Are there any questions from the committee members for Mr. Pahanka? Representative Roden.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Pahanka, you mentioned the 400 pills this week. You had another larger number that the Idaho State Police, I didn't get the number you were.
That was reported to me out of District 4.
Mr. Pahanka, speak through the chair.
Chairman Skog.
Go ahead.
Sorry, sir. The information I received from District 4, over 36,000 pills last year was seized. And in today's Times News in the lower right, on a traffic stop, Twin Falls County deputy seized 4,000 pills.
Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pahanka, you mentioned that marijuana is being laced with fentanyl. So my question is, under the language before us, would 4 grams of marijuana laced with fentanyl in the possession of a user who was aware that it was laced with fentanyl qualify for the mandatory minimum?
Mr. Chair, so reported to me by a captain from Jerome PD, a lot of these people that are smoking the marijuana have no idea that it is laced with the fentanyl. Yeah, they have no idea.
And are you finished?
Yes, sir.
Representative Young, one follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what you're telling me, and that's why in my question I specifically said if they know that it's laced with fentanyl, would 4 grams of marijuana in the possession of someone who knows that it's laced with fentanyl qualify for the mandatory minimum?
I would hope so.
And I have a question.
Yes,
Are you
Mr.
currently law enforcement, Mr. Pahanka?
I'm a former reserve deputy for the Jerome County Sheriff's Office and current chaplain for the Jerome County Police Department, Jerome County Sheriff's Office, and the Idaho State Police. So I, at times, do get called out to assist with death notifications, and it can be across the board, whether it's vehicle crash, overdose, suicide.
Thank you. Any further questions of the testifier? Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bastrachia, and I apologize, I can't roll the R's in your name.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Tracy Bastrachea, representing the Idaho Chiefs of Police Association, as well as a constituent. And unfortunately, I don't have a cool name like Jelly Roll, but I'll try. I have some nicknames from these officers in the crowd that I probably can't repeat. So first off, thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Idaho Police leadership and the fine men and women who do this job every day. It is rare that chiefs, sheriffs, line officers, and prosecutors agree on anything. And unfortunately, fentanyl is the thing that has brought us all together. It has wreaked such havoc on our community and on our vulnerable populations that we realize we have to do something to stop them. I have been in this profession for 27 years. I worked undercover for 5 years with the DEA in the late 90s, in the early 2000s, when we thought methamphetamine was king, and we thought it was the most dangerous drug we would ever see. It doesn't even come close to rivaling what we're seeing with fentanyl. I have witnessed the cost to society, and the numbers that you will hear today when it comes to overdose deaths in Idaho are widely underreported because most counties don't have the money to do toxicology on their overdose deaths. In 2023, we had 280 fatalities on our roadways, and the media can't stop talking about it. We're losing 280 citizens every day in this country to overdose deaths, and nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to take a stand. As a constituent and as a representative of the Idaho State Police, I'm begging you to take a stand against drug dealers. We talk about it in this state all of the time, how we support the blue. This is truly a vote on whether or not you support your local law enforcement.
Mr. Chairman.
Whether or not you...
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead and make your objection or comment.
Thank you. Just an objection. One of the things that we don't do here is impugn people's motives. And so I think part of the problem I've had with some of the narrative is that there's an assumption that if somebody asks questions or if they are not 100% supportive of a particular piece of the legislation, that they don't back the blue. And I think that's impugning motives. I think that's out of line.
Thank you. Noted, Representative Young.
I apologize.
Chief, we have to watch this for other witnesses too. We don't impugn the motives of those bringing the bill, asking questions, or testifying.
Yes.
And so please watch that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We'll give you a few more seconds
Okay.
there. Go ahead.
Yes. So what I'm saying is this. We cannot ignore the fact that we are losing somebody every day in this country and in this state to the overdose of fentanyl. And our way to stop this is to protect our borders. The only border that we can protect is our Idaho borders. And we can do that by implementing mandatory minimums and keeping drug traffickers out of our state.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from the committee? Representative Allgood.
Chief, thank you. I just want to clean something up. I think you misspoke. You said you represented the Idaho State Police. I think you mean...
No, I said Chiefs of Police.
Okay, I
Association,
misheard you. I
yes.
just wanted to make sure
Yep.
that was clear.
Idaho Chiefs of Police Association.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chief, how many fatalities due to fentanyl are there in Idaho each year?
We don't actually know that number. It's underreported because of the, like I said, the coroners in most counties aren't doing toxicology testing on overdoses because they can't afford it. The testing's too high. But at last check, if you figure, I believe in 2022, there was at least over 132 for sure, certain.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tracy, is there, we have a history in Idaho of having mandatory minimums, as has been alluded to, for 20 to 30 years. It's my opinion, having reviewed this, that this proposed legislation would take the same approach with regard to fentanyl, basically speaking, that we've taken with regard to the other drugs that are on the mandatory minimum list.
Is it your position that those mandatory minimum laws have been a success over the last 3 decades? And is that what we're trying to replicate here in Idaho with this bill?
I would say yes, it has been a success. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cannon. I would say yes. When we have people on wires saying they're not going to come to Idaho, that is that much more of a deadly drug that isn't coming to our state and isn't infecting our children and our citizens.
Okay. Appears to be no further questions. Thank you, Chief, for your time.
Thank you.
Next up, Todd Hogan. Please state your name, who you represent, if anyone, and where you're from.
My name's Todd Hogan. I'm representing myself, and I'm from here in Boise. So I'm here to speak with you today about the mandatory minimum aspect of this bill. As a former gang member, as a former addict, I've seen this from the other side. There's no doubt that fentanyl is a big problem. I've known at least 8 people this year alone, because I work in the recovery field, that have died from a fentanyl overdose. So strong sentences need to be given out to those that commit these crimes. With that said, I would like to say by removing a judge's discretion in sentencing, we are in fact taking away their ability to decide if the individual before them is a hardened criminal or if they're someone who has made poor choices but is redeemable. And a lot of these people that are trafficking are addicts that are entrapped into trafficking, bringing the stuff into the state because the people that are pushing these drugs don't want to come into the state. The mandatory sentences only serve to appease a community's frustration and anger towards a crime an offender is committed in the short term, but they make our community a much more dangerous place to live in the long term because these individuals more often than not come out the other end of these long sentences institutionalized, gang affiliated, and with an ingrained criminal mentality. I fully believe in some cases long sentences need to be given those that preterize on those with addiction issues just to make a buck. But I also think it's an injustice to mandate that someone who is struggling with addiction and may have committed a crime to feed that addiction is given a long prison sentence. The only way to determine between these two, whether somebody's a dealer or an addict a lot of times,
Sir, you'll have to wrap up.
is by giving our judges the power to decide that from the bench.
Are there any questions from the panel? Seeing none, thank you for your articulate testimony. Well done.
Thank you.
Next up is Susan Mansfield. Mansfield, are you here? And I forget to watch the timer sometimes, so either of these ladies on the side of me just kick me. It's close? Okay. All right. Please state your name, who you
My
represent.
name is
if
Susan
anyone.
Mansfield, and I'm from Garden City, Idaho. And thank you, Chairman Skog and representatives, for this opportunity. I'm Susan Mansfield, the mother of an addict and convicted felon who spent time in jail and prison and eventually died from his poison. He needed rehab. I'm here today to urge you to vote no on House Bill 406 and to remind all legislators that their duty is to write and uphold laws that are good for everyone, including those who break them. It's true that drug use and now fentanyl use are huge problems in our communities, and we need laws to protect all of us, including offenders. In 1992, mandatory minimums were passed by the Idaho legislature. Despite these minimums, drug use and crime have increased in Idaho. We need a law that distinguishes addicts from traffickers. Addicts need rehab. Traffickers need to feel the full weight of the law. Our prisons are full of people like my son who went to jail and prison for his own personal use as an addict. He was not in prison for trafficking, stealing, or any other crime in the community. His crime was against his own body. He needed rehab. Jail and prison only taught him how to deepen his addiction behavior. Mandatory minimums are not good for addicts. House Bill 406 needs to focus on traffickers with language to prove intent to distribute. This would ensure that prosecutors target actual traffickers and not low-level users and addicts. House Bill 406 should focus on traffickers and not on addicts. They're very different. The wording in this bill needs to allow judges to judge and prosecutors to prosecute real offenders, those who traffic and intent to distribute. I urge the committee to amend House Bill 406 to include language to prove intent to distribute fentanyl.
All right, you have to wrap up.
I wish my son would have had the
You have
opportunity.
to wrap up, ma'am.
I'm one sentence.
All right.
I wish my son would have had the opportunity to be rehabilitated instead of incarcerated. Thank you.
Any questions of the testifier? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question?
Oh,
Sorry,
quick
one quick
question.
question.
Sorry to call you back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Mansfield. Was there any drug courts before your son got put into prison? I mean, was there some? I always hear about drug courts, and that's sometimes an option.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Scott, the timing, I'm not sure if there was drug court. He did not get drug court. I stood in front of a judge and asked the prosecutor and the judge if they would send him to rehab on my bill, that I would pay for it, and I had a bed for him, and they said no, he was a flight risk. So, yeah, thank you.
Excuse me, Mrs. Mansfield, just to follow up, how long ago was that your son was sentenced?
He died in 2009.
And when was the sentence?
The sentence was he was out for about 5 years, I think, prior to that.
Thank you for that clarification. Jordan McCarthy? I think you're learning the drill.
Chairman,
Go ahead and state your name, where you're from, if you represent anyone.
Jordan McCarthy. I'm here representing the Fraternal Order of Police. So I can speak to a lot of what's already been said. I worked undercover for many years. We've heard stories of that these dealers, these traffickers won't come to Idaho. I can speak to for the fact that I have literally sat with these people who've told me, I'm not coming to Idaho. I don't care the cost. I don't care the price. I don't care how much I'm bringing. I'm not coming to Idaho. They know in no uncertain terms that there are serious repercussions for entering the state with that kind of quantities. And when we're talking about 4 grams, 100 pills, this is a lot of drugs, just so we're clear. Like 100 lethal doses, this is not user amounts. This is lethal amounts. These people are dealing death. These people know, and I can tell you firsthand, these people know that they are intentionally killing people. They know that there is going to be some fallout from some of the pills and some of the drugs that they're selling. And the craziest part about this whole thing is they want that. I've actually had a conversation with people who said, this guy just sold this person a lethal amount. He has the best dope on the street. It's crazy. The mentality behind this is insane. I'm asking you to consider this bill. This is something we've needed. This is an absolute death that's being dealt on our streets. We're not talking about addicts. This is not something we're talking about. We're talking about absolute traffickers.
Any questions from the panel? I see a light at the end. Representative Allgood.
Thank you, Officer McCarthy, and appreciate your service. Have you, in your law enforcement experience, have you ever encountered somebody that accidentally or unknowingly had a large quantity of drugs that they were not aware it was illegal or something of that nature?
Chairman Skog, Representative Allgood. No, that doesn't happen. You don't carry around. So today's street prices, it's gone down quite a bit, but today's street prices, you're looking about $7 to $10 for a pill. You don't accidentally have $700 to $1,000 worth of drugs walking around. That's not user amounts. User amounts is a handful of pills, 20 maybe tops. You don't just accidentally walk around with 1,000 pills without and knowing that you're going to sell it or transport it for someone else.
Representative Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCarthy, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and my experience is in dealing with Idaho's mandatory minimums on other drugs that are already on the list, that a very high percentage of cases that are initially charged as trafficking cases get pled down to possession cases. One, is that consistent with your experience? And two, if that's happening, is that a problem with prosecutors making deals with traffickers, or are we catching people up in the net that aren't traffickers and are users?
Chairman Skog, Representative Cannon, that's actually an excellent question. And I think that kind of speaks to, and I can't speak to how the prosecutor's office works and how they determine which direction they take cases, but I think that also is a reality of navigating just taking the people that are caught in the net and throwing them away. I think that there is some ability for and I can't speak on their behalf, but there is some ability for these prosecutors to determine, like, this is not a drug trafficker. This is someone who got caught up, who had a bunch of drugs. We can plead this down and make a deal and get them appropriate sentencing. Does that make sense?
It does. Follow up, Chairman?
One follow-up?
So, and I can appreciate that. I think that a majority of prosecutors are motivated by a sense of justice, and I think there are a handful, and you can opine on this if you want, that are more motivated by conviction rates and by winning.
I'm going to object. That's impugning the motives of our judicial officers. So don't go down that line.
Is it detrimental, in your opinion, to not only have prosecutorial discretion, but to have some form of judicial discretion at a sentencing level?
Chairman Skog, Representative Cannon, I can't speak to that. I don't know how the prosecutor's office works. I know what I do. I make cases. When I make cases, we don't just grab one-time users who, these are cases that are generally long-term. These are cases that we've done multiple deals with. We know these people are trafficking. This isn't a one-time deal. This is the definition of trafficking, the cases we put together.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCarthy, I'm wondering, will this open up tools to coordinate with the federal investigations on some of these traffickers? Because it sounds like a lot of this stuff's coming from over the border. Will this legislation and the language in this be able to help you guys with the tools you need to coordinate with going after the bigger guys?
Chairman Skog, Representative Scott. I can't speak to how the federal side works. I do know that we worked, when I worked the undercover unit, we do work very closely with the DEA. We actually worked in their office, and we did work cases together. And I don't know how that's going to help us, but I do know that giving us the tools to have this in our pocket would be vastly helpful.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Officer, could you show me with your hands how big a quantity 4 grams is? Is that is it a square inch of fentanyl or half a cubic inches? How big is 4 grams?
Chairman Skog, Representative Gannon. So 4 grams is not a lot as far as weight goes. Think of it's not. But when you're talking about 2 milligrams being lethal doses, you're talking about So 1 gram, just for reference, is about the size of a sugar packet. So if you can picture 4 of those, right? So, but understand that there's thousands of potential lethal doses in those 4 grams. They're not dealing drugs, they're dealing death.
One follow-up?
Thank you. Yeah, and I, as I understand it, and I agree with you, they're quite a bit more powerful, hundreds of times more powerful than our other hard drugs. So I understand that part. How do you identify? In other words, how do you identify from appearance that that a packet is fentanyl? How would a person know?
Chairman Scoggin, Representative Gannon. So based on training and experience, obviously, and fentanyl is uniquely interesting in the fact that it comes in many forms, pills, powders, and you don't know what you're dealing with, quite honestly, until you test it, right? We have field testing kits that we can deploy in the field to figure out potentially what this stuff is. Then we send it to the lab. Idaho State Police has a narcotics lab, and they can actually tell us without a doubt what it is.
Mr. Chairman, follow-up?
You've had 2 questions?
Yeah, I was just wondering what color it was.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman and Officer, what color is, I understand the pills might be, but the pure fentanyl, what color is pure fentanyl that might be in one of these little packets?
Chairman and Representative, this is, it's from the best of my knowledge, it comes white. It's just a clear, it's a white chemical, right, that's compounded in to make the fentanyl. And then they can add the food, right, you've seen Breaking Bad, I can add the blues, the reds, all that kind of fancy stuff, make different fancy colors and pills and all that kind of thing.
Thank you.
Representative Broughton.
Mr. Chair and Officer McCarthy, you mentioned arresting some, higher crime pleaded down to possession. Is it common or not common that these people that have been pled down and released are rearrested for essentially the same crime? Does that happen often, or does that never happen?
Chairman Skog and Representative Roten, I can't speak to that. I don't know the recidivism rate on these. I do know it obviously occurs. I don't know to the severity of, or if they are progressively getting worse or getting rehabilitated or if they're going to rehab. I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that it does occur.
All right. No further questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman.
I see Mike French. Can you hear us?
I can. Chairman Skog, are you able to hear me?
Very clearly. State your name, who you represent, if anyone, where you're from, and tell us what you know.
Thank you so much. I'm Mike French. I'm a criminal defense attorney that practices privately here in the Treasure Valley. I'm a member of the board of the Idaho Justice Project, and I rise today as a member of the Idaho Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. In opposition to this bill, we all know that for the past 30 years, we've had a flawed system with this mandatory minimum scheme. When it was enacted, there was judicial discretion, and it was intended to target traffickers and to deter traffickers. And as Ms. Mansfield so eloquently put it, and I think as we're really getting a sense of, and the debate really is largely around, are these traffickers or are these users who are being caught up? And I would put to you that my experience is that it's users who get caught up in this world, who, if they are selling, it's in order to support a habit. that folks are addicted, they need treatment. And I would tell you that the heartbreaking truth is that people that are prosecuted under these laws, it's not traffickers that are just taking chances. It's folks that don't know, and they are shocked and appalled. And so I would posit that the deterrent effect is not actually out there. And I would love to genuinely sit down with anyone from law enforcement and hear these wires where traffickers are saying they're not coming to Idaho because of these mandatory minimum laws. And in the face of our astronomical incarceration rates, in the face of the fact that we're currently housing civilly committed, mentally ill people at the maximum security prison, when we need a $24 million facility that our director of corrections is asking for, and where we can't even keep the heat on, we can't even responsibly take care of the folks that we're incarcerating already. We're diverting precious resources and incarcerating our own children, our friends, our neighbors, folks who are addicted and need help. And that's where we ought to be spending our money, not on these ineffective laws. Thank you.
Well done on the timing. I didn't catch where you were from again.
Boise.
All right. Any questions to our testifier? Representative Allgood.
Thank you. Did I understand you right when you said that these people that are being incarcerated didn't know what they were doing?
I would say that they didn't know what they were risking. That risk really wasn't coming into, factoring into their decision making, that they were addicted, that what was factoring into their decision making was, when you're in active addiction, that's going to some extent become your livelihood, because that's all that's available to you. And so you would know that you are perhaps selling, although intent, as we know, is not required under this law and never has been, proof of intent. You just have no idea what you're risking. And so people, and heartbreakingly, their parents, are completely shell-shocked when they learn of the sentences that their kids could face.
One follow-up?
So is it your experience that these people that are incarcerated, this is their first offense?
Chairman Scott, Representative Allgood, that happens, yes.
Commonly, or is this a rare situation?
Talk through the chair, and I'm going to limit to 2 questions, or we're going to not get everyone to testify today, except in a strange circumstance. Representative Roden.
Mr. Chair and Ms. French, you mentioned that some of these users are actually selling as well to support their habit. Is that what you said?
Chairman Scott, Representative, yes, that does happen.
So what you're saying is, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Ms. French, 2 things can be true at the same time. They can be an addict and a pusher, and evidently, because if they're selling it, they're a seller. That's who we're after. Is that correct?
That does happen, but these statutes and this bill would perpetuate a dragnet. I'm sorry, Chairman Scott, Representative. This is a sledgehammer when we need a scalpel.
See no further red lights. Thank you very much for your testimony and taking the time. And just know that I'm proud this is my first virtual one of the year, and it went just great. So take care.
Thank you, Chairman.
Now, this says in person, and some people get it mixed up. Some people get it mixed up if they're in person or remote. This says in person, but it's now doing remote. So is Blaine Kanzati here? Please state your name, where you're from, who you represent, if anyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, good morning. My name is Blaine Kanzati. I serve as president of Idaho Family Policy Center Our organization wholeheartedly supports House Bill 406. Many of us have seen the devastation caused by the wave of fentanyl that's flowing into Idaho. It's destroying families. It's poisoning our communities. A lot of the discussion so far this hearing has focused on mandatory minimums. And one thing is clear. We've done public opinion polling on what Idaho voters think about mandatory minimums as it relates to fentanyl dealers. And more than 78% of likely Idaho voters believe that the state legislature should enact or add fentanyl to the mandatory minimum sentencing law for drug traffickers. My team has also done an analysis of the provision in this bill that creates the crime of drug-induced homicide. We found that at least 25 other states have drug-induced homicide laws, and many of those state laws, the language in those laws, are substantially similar to the language in House Bill 406. And I won't take up any more of your time. I'll just reiterate that it's time to send the message that fentanyl drug trafficking will no longer be tolerated in our state. So please send it to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Any questions of Mr. Canzati? Representative Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Consati, I think that we all, and I don't want to speak for anyone else, but it seems to me like we all want to strongly deal with drug traffickers. I feel like a common hang-up among myself and maybe some other members of this committee is that we're not seeing that, to us, a person who is in possession, for instance, of 4 grams of marijuana laced with fentanyl is a trafficker. Can you speak to that? In your experience, is that the person that we need to put in prison for a mandatory minimum sentence of years?
Mr. Canzati, I don't know how experienced you are with drugs, but if you want to answer that, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Cannon. Yeah, I am not law enforcement representative, so I can't answer that very well. I will say that obviously this mandatory minimum scheme still allows for prosecutorial discretion, and I would certainly hope that a prosecutor would consider those details as they're deciding how to proceed with the case.
Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Casati, I find it interesting that you'd done some polling. I'm always curious about the questions when it comes to polling. Questions can lead or not say enough. So, of course, a concern of mine is also the automatic sentence homicide. So I'm assuming your question didn't address this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Did your polling maybe address a scenario where you've got some high school kids and they're planning to do a party, and maybe high school kid A asks high school kid B, hey, do you still have that same connection? I don't know. Can you get the stuff for us? I don't know. I mean, maybe, but I don't have any money. So everybody chips in $20, $30. You got 10 people and they get it because they all want it, and then someone dies. Who's culpable? I'm assuming that probably wasn't asked, but I really am serious about that. To what extent did you ask the question in the polling as far as the last section in the piece?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Ehart, we only polled on the mandatory minimum piece. So the question that we asked, the company we commissioned to run the poll, do you agree with the following statement? The Idaho legislature should adopt mandatory minimum prison sentencing for fentanyl drug dealers. We did not poll on the drug-induced homicide provision of the bill. We did an analysis of that provision of the bill, and we found that, as I said in my testimony, 25 other states have similar provisions, many of which have language substantially similar to the language in this legislation.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I misunderstood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Canzati.
Thank you.
We're going to go at east for a moment.
Hardware and closed captioning for Idaho in Session is provided by the Idaho Legislature and Idaho Legislative Services Office. Additional funding is provided by the Idaho Public Television Endowment.
Get addicts users with mandatory minimum sentences. We shouldn't be throwing addicts in prisons for years. They need treatment, not prison time. And number three, if you do choose to move ahead with the mandatory minimums on fentanyl through House Bill 406, you must include language to prove intent to distribute. This ensures prosecutors are targeting actual traffickers and not low-level users. Such language is currently missing in House Bill 406. And we do urge a no vote on House Bill 406 as it's currently written. And finally, I'd add this as a father and the second half of the Mansfield family to appear today, is that we realized with our own son's addiction that even if drugs stopped at the border, there are always mules that brought them across. There are always people that did not know they were doing it. There was such a complex net that to simply say it stops at the border is limited in its reality. And so having gone through that, we would just add that as a personal note. Mr. Chairman, thanks. Did I hit the button?
Great.
Okay.
Now, any questions?
A little bit.
Representative Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mansfield.
Yes.
You mentioned that if we proceed forward with a mandatory minimum piece of legislation that we should include intent to deliver. I've heard folks in the law enforcement community say that is too difficult or, makes it so that they can't do their jobs. What kind of, how would somebody go about proving intent to deliver if there was a dealer on trial?
Mr. Chairman.
If you have the expertise or haven't.
Representative, I do not have the expertise in that area. I will say from owning New Hope Community Health for a number of years in the early 2000s, that what we experienced with over 4,000 ex-addicts and ex-inmates in 19 homes in the Treasure Valley was that intent was determined oftentimes in the cases of our clients based on the reality of their past. A lot of the new people that came in were wide-eyed and unbelieving in the level of force that had come against them. The intent was pretty obvious at that time and experientially. Those that were repeat offenders, we let that to the attorneys to work out, the prosecuting attorneys and the defense attorneys.
Representative Allgood.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I just, comparing Idaho to our states around us, mostly to the west, I'd like you to qualify your statement that mandatory minimums do not work based on our crime compared to other states and the drug problems they have. It seems like they're working in Idaho to some effect. I'd like you to qualify that if you would, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Representative
Again,
Allgood.
Mr. Mansfield, if you have the expertise, you may or may not answer that. How would you?
Thank you. I have the experience. When you work with, as we have through New Hope Community Health, when it was in existence, we found that the idea that somehow addicts were afraid or had some sort of cognitive sense of thinking through the either-ors of whatever the situation was, that wasn't even part of the equation. These were addicts who just did it, who just did what they were going to do. They didn't sit there and think, my heavens, what's this going to do to my resume or my CV? They don't live in that world. And so what we found was, in our experience in Idaho with the men and women who were addicts and inmates, was that the only real thing that changed their life ended up, once they were in prison fellowship and other organizations that had representatives or chaplains in the system, could actually help them have cognitive awareness of how foolish their lives had been up to that point and how the changes could occur. That's what our experience showed.
Representative Mathias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mansfield, first of all, my deepest condolences to you and Susan's loss. I can't imagine what you've been going through for the last 15, 16 years. I have been struggling, like many on this committee, with the notion that this law is not clear enough to prevent users and addicts from being scooped up and sent directly to prison. I'm looking at a piece of a report. I think the research was conducted in 2018, but I suspect that since it gets to culture, that it's probably still generally useful. And my question for you is this. This report is saying that for those who are in prison on felonies for drug use or possession, so non-traffickers, just people who had personal amounts in their possession or their use, that they are in prison because they are either violent, they have priors, or they had at least one failed attempt at diversion or treatment. Would you say that your son fell in one of those three categories?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, thank you for your kind words about our loss. Our son did not fall into those categories. Everything was about personal use. There was a brokenness in him that he felt he could only mitigate as a result of use. So it was not violent. It was not in the other categories that you just mentioned. So from the familial experience, no. What I did find with the thousands of others was that there was a percentage that were violent. There were some that they were looking at the opportunity for getting out of prison or jail in any way that they could, and this might be an exercise. And what we did was I actually put hundreds of them back into prison when I realized that attitude or those actions were there because they weren't faithful, they weren't available, and they weren't teachable. So they got the life that they wanted. I was very firm in that. And one of the things I do want to respond to you about too is that if we could work out the idea to prove intent, at least bring in language into an amended version of this bill, I think there'd be a lot of us that would say, okay, let's look at that and consider supporting that. I think it would be an opportunity to have a bridge. I just think at this point, the example that was given earlier, I think Mike French said it very well about using a sledgehammer. It's the potential in this is too great. And as a dad, hoping that other dads don't have to have their sons or daughters go through what we went through the system since 1992, my hope would be that maybe we'd see a win-win.
All right, there appears to be no further questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Is Kelly Hobbs in the room? Mr. Hobbs, please come forward. State your name, where you're from, who you represent, if anyone.
All right. My name is Kelly Hobbs. I live in Caldwell. I'm representing myself and my daughter. Since my daughter is unable to be here, I'm hoping I can share a picture with the committee members and Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
This is my daughter and her granddaughter. Or my granddaughter, her daughter. Shelby got in an accident around about 7 or 8 years ago. And she got prescribed Oxycontin. And that was at a time where doctors were just prescribing it like candy. So the prescription ran out, and Shelby had to turn to street drugs. August 14th of 2022, she bought what she thought was an Oxycontin. On the 16th, she took the pill and she was dead in minutes. It's my only daughter. This bill really hits home for me, and I'm in support of it. I believe that if people knew the consequences of what they were doing, and I believe the law enforcement, when they've spoke to people that says, yeah, I'm not going to go sling in Idaho because there's too much at stake. So I'm here in support of this, and something has got to be done. Something's got to be done. If it hasn't affected you yet, any of the board members, Mr. Chairman, if it hasn't affected you yet, I can almost assure you that it will, because it's just rampant. They're making pills that look like Flintstone vitamin snacks for your kids. You know, it's insane. And Ada and Canyon counties are huge hubs of the trafficking. So I ask you to support this bill, and we can get some of this taken care of.
Okay. Any questions, Mr. Hobbs? Mr. Hobbs, would you be willing to part with that photograph since it's been used as evidence in our room?
I sure will.
Okay, would you give that to our page, please? Thank you for your testimony. I'm truly sorry for your loss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members, for letting me talk.
Is Gene Fisher in the room? You know the drill.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. My name is Jean Fisher, and I am here as the State Director for Right on Crime. Right on Crime recognizes the impact of fentanyl in our communities and the devastating effects that it is having on our loved ones and our families. I'm not here to concentrate on the fentanyl issue. I'm here to concentrate on the drug-induced homicide issue today. I'd like to address both the efficacy of the drug-induced homicide portion of House Bill 406, as well as some of the unintended consequences. I come to you as a retired Ada County prosecutor. I've served 33 years in that position and have prosecuted some of our worst cases involving child sexual abuse, serious crimes, as well as my fair share of murders. In Idaho, we essentially have 4 murder categories. We have first-degree murder, which is premeditated, malice aforethought, excluding capital crimes, and that carries life with 10 years. We have second-degree murder, which is the reckless disregard for life without premeditation. It carries 10 years and up to life. We have voluntary murder, which is in the heat of passion, rage. It carries up to 15 years. Involuntary murder is a criminal act without the intent to kill, and it carries up to 10 years. No mandatory minimums on either voluntary or involuntary murder. Now we have this drug-induced homicide, and I'd like to ask, how does it compare to what we already have in existing law? It does not require, it does require a criminal act, that is the turning over of drugs, but it does not require any intent to kill. It sounds very much like involuntary manslaughter, and quite frankly, it's much easier to prove. Causation issues in the drug-induced homicide is very difficult. How do you prove that the last person who gave something to someone caused their death? It is a problem. Most people involved in this are polysubstance abusers, and they're going to get ensnared by it. I'm also very concerned about the juvenile aspects of this because they will fall under the mandatory auto waiver for juveniles, which is a huge issue that you should be concerned about.
Any questions, Ms. Fisher? Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Fisher. Could you speak just a little more to the last part that you mentioned here about the waiver?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Young, under Idaho Code right now, 2509, which under the Juvenile Corrections Act says that any juvenile who's charged with any sort of murder under any degree is an auto waiver into adult court. Right now, the way that this bill is language, it does not protect juveniles from that. Juveniles, user to user, if they get ensnared in this, are looking at an auto waiver just as and treated as an adult. So your 14-year-old who's at school is going to get ensnared in this very serious problem.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Fisher. So are you saying that kids are going to be subject to this maximum imprisonment of life and a $25,000 fine?
As I read, excuse me, Chairman, Representative Gannon, as I read the law presently, they would be subjected to the same penalty. Yes.
And one other question, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Fisher. So, and with the drug-induced homicide proposed statute, proposal in this bill, is there a requirement of intent in there that the juvenile would have, that the state would have to meet in order to prosecute a juvenile under this statute?
Chairman Scott, Representative Gannon, under the way that this proposal is, it's sort of a stacked. The law itself, that as I read it, does not have intent. There's certainly no criminal intent to kill. There is an intent that you have done a criminal act, which is possessing and or giving the drug to somebody else that resulted in their death. That part is the part of the intent. But there is no intent to kill. There is no intent to be a murderer in this when you're passing it off to your buddy at a party and you think you're all going to have a good time and wake up the next day and talk about it. These are not people who are intending to kill under this law.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fisher, earlier today, at my request, a copy of Idaho Code Section 20-509 was distributed to our committee. Is that the law that you're referring to, that is the auto waiver for juveniles that you've referenced?
Chairman Scott, Representative Cannon, yes.
Okay. Follow, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. And so, if I understand your concern right, by statute, any juvenile that commits a homicide, which would be considered, which would be included in this drug-induced homicide, if it were to become law, would automatically be treated as an adult instead of a juvenile if they were 14 years of age or older. Do I have that right?
Chairman Skog, Representative Cannon, that is how I read the law, yes.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, Chairman.
Ms. Fisher, does the prosecutor still have discretion, even though that child may be charged as an adult, to bring that back down?
The prosecutor, excuse me, Chairman Scott, yes, a prosecutor will have discretion to remove the child from, could do that, yes. But on the other hand, there will be a tremendous amount of pressure, which is what this is all about, drug-induced homicide, to move forward in order to make Idaho look as serious as we are about it.
And then there's been discussion about the sentencing portion of this. There's no minimum, so a judge can also have discretion in this situation with the child, correct? As to the sentence of time. It could actually be 0 if the judge decides 0 jail time.
Chairman Scott, correct. Right now, it would be essentially an indeterminate life sentence, so it would not carry a mandatory minimum. Yes, but it is a felony, so I mean, it does require, some amount of probation. It's not going to just be you have a felony and there's nothing to your sentence.
All right, that's my 2 questions.
Yeah.
Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fisher, this question was probably better suited for you anyway, and given the fact that you had vast experience as a prosecuting attorney, and it is my understanding that Section 3 absolutely applies to kids, and we were told a couple days ago that it did. So this is a sincere question. I'm curious how it would go. So I'll repeat the scenario. You have a group of high school kids, and, they're not consistent drug users, but they're going to have a party. And so, they're asking, friend A, hey, do you still have the connections? And maybe it's a group of them. And he says, I think I do, but I don't have any money. No worries. Everybody, give $20, $30. They all pool the money together and they send someone off, could be any of them, to go get some drugs for a party. And they bring the drugs back, someone dies. Who's culpable?
Chairman Skog, Representative Earhart, that is a very good question, and causation in this case, under this law, it would be nearly impossible to approve. I think that it's causation in general under this law, drug-induced homicide, is very difficult to prove because you're also going to have a medical examiner who is going to be able to say with certainty that whatever the drug was that was passed, and maybe it was the last drug, you don't know what else was on board, is the one that caused the death. Remember, most people come into this with polysubstance issues and addictions. Very rarely is it just going to be one drug on board. It could be, but causation is going to be a very difficult thing to prove. And under your scenario, that is even more difficult.
Follow-up?
One follow-up.
One follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Fisher, these are some of the things that have been swirling in my mind for a while. Is the scenario, it wouldn't necessarily have to be exact, but is the scenario which I presented, given the increased and incredible amount of fentanyl in the area, am I that far off with a scenario such as that occurring based on your past prosecuting experience?
Chairman Skog, Representative Earhart, it's my belief that your scenario is not at all far off, especially as it relates to juveniles and those that are in our high schools. The other issue, quite frankly, that is a huge concern is that there is absolutely no mercy in the drug-induced homicide. There is no good Samaritan effort in this. Somebody knows what's happened and maybe they were involved in it. The way that this law reads, it is so restrictive and so punitive that there'd be little inclination to want to help. There's no mercy.
Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and ma'am, thank you for being here. I found the section here, 184006, where we have manslaughter defined involuntary and vehicular, which both in my mind have some level of parity with what we're talking about. Would you mind reminding me and the committee of the parameters for sentencing around those two crimes?
Chairman Scott, Representative Young, I had not brought up the vehicular manslaughter just because it didn't seem to really apply necessarily to what we have here involving alcohol or substance impairment. However, it certainly could. That voluntary manslaughter, vehicular manslaughter, I believe, off the top of my head, is 15 years. Voluntary manslaughter, which again is the what we think about as rage and passion. You have an intentional act, but you didn't necessarily intend the killing. It's done in rage and that sort of thing. That's 15 years with no mandatory minimum. And then involuntary manslaughter is you're committing a criminal act, but you don't intend to kill, and it results in killing. Think of road rage incident, where it gets out of hand and somebody does a criminal act by striking somebody or doing something that results in somebody's death. That wasn't your intention. That's what happened. That carries 10 years with no mandatory minimum.
Before your follow-up, I've had a request specifically from my mic and that of Representative Cannon that we speak closer to the mic. People online aren't hearing us, so. Representative Young, one follow-up.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to just clarify something, and then I have one other follow-up.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and ma'am. So when you say 15 years or 10 years, is that the maximum sentence or is that the floor? What is that?
Chairman Scott, Representative Young, that's the maximum sentence that someone could face for voluntary manslaughter is 15 years. For involuntary manslaughter, the maximum they could face is 10 years. There is an associated fine with each one of those, although rarely do judges impose that fine, but that is the maximum amount of time that they can face is up to 10 years on involuntary manslaughter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then just one final question. You've talked about the Good Samaritan law, and this is something that I asked about in the print hearing. I was hoping we would have more information about it. I've heard conflicting reports that, yes, the Good Samaritan law would cover someone in these circumstances, so we don't have to worry about it. And yet it sounds like you have a different opinion. If you could please clarify why it is that you believe that it does or does not apply, that would be appreciated.
Chairman Scott, Representative Young, I believe that you need an actual affirmative defense in this law, written as part of this law, that would provide an affirmative defense that says that if you were to administer aid, that it could be an affirmative defense to the crime that's been committed. We in Idaho have a Good Samaritan law for alcohol and for just high school students, college students primarily is where that's aimed, where if, as a result of what's happened on some of our campuses, where some of our students had, such high rates of alcohol and they passed out or wandered off, and other students, and they were under the age of 21, and other students did not provide any aid. And this law was created, I think, back in 2018 for the first time, but it only addressed alcohol because drugs are illegal. And so we didn't have a Good Samaritan law that would allow somebody to render aid for giving somebody drugs automatically because it's a criminal act. That's where that stopped. I think it was in 2017, 2018, that is where that stopped. So in this instance, right now, without there being a Good Samaritan or a good faith exception or affirmative action that's actually written in this drug-induced homicide law, from my reading of it, I mean, there's lots to litigate, I suppose, but I don't see that there's any effort for a Good Samaritan that would protect that person. If you are the one that gave the drug, saw what was happening, then tried to administer aid, why you would tell on yourself if you know that you're looking at up to life imprisonment.
Representative Allgood.
Ms. Fisher, thank you for your service. I appreciate that very much. Is it common when a prosecuting attorney gets a report from a police department, police officer, they read the case and determine that it probably does not fit the charge the officer is requesting, and they amend that charge or change that charge to a more appropriate charge?
Chairman Skog, Representative Allgood, it's always going to be the job of the prosecutor to look at the, to look at the case, look at the investigation and the police reports that have come in, and try to come up with a case that they can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes we have law enforcement officers who bring in a case that they've investigated and believe that they have a thoroughly investigated case for a murder, for instance, and a prosecutor may review all of that, look at the crime, look at the intent, look at all of that, and conclude that, it's not there, and they have to charge something else. They could also send it back to the investigator and say, you're missing X, Y, and Z. Go look for X, Y, and Z, and come back to me if this is what you really want. So they should be cooperating with each other as to, what the charges that they are pursuing and what the prosecutor ultimately can prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And so it's kind of cooperative effort. It's not an automatic situation. It's a cooperative effort between the law enforcement officer and the prosecutor's office to reach the appropriate charge in each case.
Chairman Scott, Representative Allgood, of course. I mean, law enforcement investigates cases and prosecutors prosecute. It's law and order. Think of that. Da-dum-bum, that law and order. There is a division.
Personal privilege. I watched the Blue Blood show all seasons, and I think of that prosecutor investigator conflict. So, Representative Mathias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Fisher, could you clarify something for me? What I've heard repeatedly throughout the testimony today is, on the one hand, that users, addicts, sometimes traffickers don't know what the law says, don't know what the risk calculation looks like based on statute, don't care, and therefore the deterrent effect is non-existent. We've been told they don't look at the law, they don't care, on the one hand. But you just suggested that if there's an accidental overdose and someone is inclined to help that person as a good Samaritan, that they might be reluctant to because there's no affirmative defense in the bill, which suggests they know what's in the law. So help me understand, when do people know what's in the law, and how do they take that into consideration?
Answer if you can.
Chairman Scott, Representative Mathias. It's a great question. Those are not easy questions just to answer out like off the top of in here. There are times when we have individuals who are users and addicts who know that it's against the law. I can't stand here with a straight face in front of you and think that there aren't addicts up there who know that the drugs that they're taking, the marijuana that they're smoking, the meth that they're shooting up, they know they're committing an illegal act, right? I mean, I can't say with a straight act that they don't know that. Now they share it with their buddy, and their buddy takes it before they do, and maybe it is laced with fentanyl, or maybe it's not, but they don't know what else is already on board, and that person then starts to struggle and they die. The person that's there that gave it, they certainly know what they did was illegal. They know their drug use is wrong. That part, I think, is relatively clear. I don't know that anybody here with a straight face could say that people who are smoking dope and using meth and shooting up heroin don't know that what they're doing is wrong and illegal, and it needs to be done quietly and secretly to the extent that it's going to. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question all the way, because it's a complicated question. If it's just truly a good Samaritan who had nothing to do with the delivery of the drug, I'm at a party with my high school friends and everybody is there, and all of a sudden somebody drops and I'm there and I didn't have anything to do with it, and I go render aid. Well, I hope that for all of our children, for every citizen that we have, I didn't do anything wrong, I'm going to render aid. And I know that I would think that I would never get in trouble for that, and that prosecutors and law enforcement officers would ferret that out very quickly. But if I'm the person that gave the drug, paid the $30 along with everybody else, was participating in it, I know it was illegal, you know it was illegal, and now you have an issue about who caused this drug-induced homicide. And that's where things become very difficult with causation or with rendering aid, help, and assistance, assuming that, they're not so altered in their state that they know better and will try to help.
Representative Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Fisher, I wanted to follow up on a question that I think Representative Allgood asked about the changing of charges. Is it also I want you to address the practice of plea bargaining and, the prevalency of taking a charge that law enforcement believes is a legitimate charge, but still reducing that charge, and in order to kind of get the system moving and not having to try every case and so forth. Talk about the prevalence of that and kind of your thoughts on that practice in your years as a prosecutor.
Chairman Skog, Representative Cannon, the use of plea negotiations for prosecutors is a very valuable tool for lots and lots of reasons, partly to keep things moving along, partly because prosecutors may see that there's a flaw in something that was originally charged, but you have a lesser included that you could offer and you can move that case along quickly. I'm a firm believer that prosecutors need the ability to have plea negotiations and that they should be able to engage in that. And it's not a dirty word and it's not a dirty process within the criminal justice system. It quite frankly is needed and we need to move that along. Does it happen regularly and routinely? Of course it does. In my own practice, which was primarily as chief of special crimes, with lewd conduct and child sexual abuse and some of those sorts of cases, I had the practice of having to work with children, and there were some children that were never, ever going to be able to take the stand, ever. There just was too much going on, too much grief, too much pain, and they were not going to be able to do it. And I knew that, and I knew that I had someone who was really guilty of what happened. And so sometimes you have to take that route to get something for or nothing, and you're going to go for it, and you make plea negotiations, and you do the very best that you can on the case that is before you. And I'm a firm believer of that, and spent my entire career trying to withhold the best standards possible. And I think that's what prosecutors primarily try to do.
Representative Alfieri.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Fisher, thank you. I wanted to ask you perhaps to clarify something, and that is with what Representative Ehart suggested. There is nothing in Section 3, correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing in Section 3 of this bill that absolutely requires a charge of homicide in a scenario that was suggested by Representative Ehart. Is that right? The scenario being that where there's a party and someone takes a pill and dies. There's nothing that necessarily requires a charge of homicide be brought by the prosecutor.
Chairman Scott, Representative Alfieri, no, there is no requirement that a charge be brought forward under those circumstances. I think it's noteworthy, though, that if we're going to pass a law like this drug-induced homicide, that we all look at it and say, how effective is it really going to be? What is the efficiency of this law? Is it going to really work? We know that there are huge causation issues with it, and you already have other tools. You have involuntary manslaughter. It's much simpler to prove. I appreciate that the name drug-induced homicide is important for society. It's important for our community to recognize that we are doing something about this crime and it's got the name attached to it. But as far as actually proving it, it has huge proof problems. And you can prove this with involuntary manslaughter if that's really what you wanted to do because you thought that somebody had such a bad act or that they deserved it because of their history or otherwise.
Thank you.
Okay, let's give this testifier a break.
Thank you.
We worked hard. Committee, hold on a little longer. Let's take a comfort break after one more witness. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Is Sheriff Donahue here? Sheriff Donahue, there he is. You weren't wearing a hat, so I didn't see you.
The good state trooper made me take it off since it is my uniform, but Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Sheriff Kieran Donahue, representing Kenny County Sheriff's Office and the Idaho Sheriff's Association. I was asked to come here today by members that were working on this bill to talk primarily about the border, the southern border and the northern border, not just Idaho's border. Where does fentanyl come from? Who dictates? It's actually, as you all know, I've testified before this committee before, this is all driven by the Mexican cartels. I literally just got off a plane from New York State yesterday testifying there or lecturing, and I'll be on the border next week. The cartels control every aspect of the fentanyl that comes into the state of Idaho, without question. There are ruthless organizations. Some of the seizures that DEA has in 2023, just these amounts are staggering, that they've seized 76,500,000 fentanyl-laced pills. Laced pills that we've seized. 19,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. Lab analysis this year has actually gone 7 out of every 10 pills are a lethal dose. Using that data, the 2023 seizures represents over 384 million lethal doses in the United States, including Idaho. And U.S. intelligence estimates that the transcontinental organizations trafficking that fentanyl into the United States, the amount is 4 times greater than what we're seizing. So Idaho is a target, just like every other state in the union, by the cartels to traffic this deadly substance. And you just must always remember that they are giving up 20 to 30%, their business plan, 20 to 30% of their consumer base is going to die by what they're giving them. But if one person dies on one given day, there's 100 million other consumers on the internet, including Snapchat, purchasing their product. They expect a 20 to 30% death loss. It's in their business plan. That's what we're facing. And you can just dial that down to Idaho. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Sheriff. Any questions? I don't know who was first. Representative Cannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sheriff, you're a sheriff. Sheriff, I don't know if you have expertise on this, but I want to ask you, and if you do, you can answer, and if you don't, you can say so. But one of the things that we, the committee and myself specifically, have been told is that in the economics of drugs, that drugs are price inelastic, meaning that if the price goes up, it doesn't really affect the demand. And so it does affect, the price goes up and that brings more supply into the system because the reward is greater. You could logically say, okay, the price goes up and it's harder for people to come up with the money, but they're going to come up with it through crime, and so crime goes up and so forth. I want to know your thoughts on first, do you agree that drug demand is inelastic when it's compared to price? And 2, if so, is it effective to attack the problem from a supply standpoint, or should we be looking at attacking it from a demand standpoint? That's a mouthful, but I appreciate your thoughts on that.
Go ahead,
Chairman Skog, Representative Cannon. Yes, there is some influence with the elastic aspect of the drug prices, but the key to your question, and more than anything, is the oversupply. The oversupply. That oversupply actually keeps the price down. The cartels know this. For instance, and I'll expand on that, but for instance, in 2023 in Los Angeles, in one of the ports, 2023. Seized a clandestine pill press. That's on our side of the border, right? Not on the Mexican side. That pill press is capable of producing 1 million pills an hour. 1 million pills an hour. And the cost of producing those pills are less than 5 cents. So if it gets to your streets, our streets, and that there's the elasticity, right, that you're talking about, they're just going to supply more. If the price seems to go too high and they feel that they're losing the consumer, that's not going to, they're not going to let that happen. They're not going to let that happen. So it does affect, but it's been talked about extensively by parents here who have lost their children and others. I myself lost my niece a year and a half ago to fentanyl overdose in Boise. Those addicts can't stop. They're going to go after it. It's been talked about how the lacing of marijuana and lacing of heroin, lacing of cocaine, lacing of methamphetamine. That's why we see the powder, more powder today than we have seen in the past, because they're what they call cutting the dope. The producer, the trafficker, makes a higher margin if he can sell you less of one product, cut it with a higher, longer high, more sustained high, fentanyl. He's making money on the back end. So the consumer, the addict, the prices are high. They can't just shut off that light. They're an addict. They're going to find a way. You just mentioned it. Criminality, burglary, robbery, theft, all feeds into that. So there's really this wide margin of, if we put mandatory minimum state of Idaho, and I strongly support this bill, will it affect? You've heard testimony. Drug dealers, cartel members do not want to get caught moving that product. But one thing that's very important, and it hasn't been talked about in this committee today, is that, remember, the cartels manage all of it. They are the kingpin of it all. They're having street-level dealers, gang members, outlaw motorcycle members, normal people or otherwise normal people moving the product. And yes, those people are going to get penalized. We can't take away from the importance of this bill to prohibit people working for the kingpins, working for the Mexican cartels. This is with drug smuggling, human smuggling of the cartels, and I literally just spoke about this in New York State yesterday, this is a U.S. intelligence numbers, a $310 billion industry to the cartels annually from the United States. They're not going to give up that money, so they will find a way to get their product here. We have to find a way to deter that. I hope that answers part of your question.
Follow up.
Go ahead.
It does, and I very much appreciate the discussion and the thoughts there. Because I listen to that and I think to myself, based on everything that's coming in and the ability to put more in, you could seize a truckload of this stuff and it wouldn't make a difference. And my question is, we all want the same thing. Where does putting our emphasis on demand and education and treatment, where does that fit into the equation?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Cannon, I think you've hit the nail on the head. We have heard other testimony today by both sides of this issue. Part of that, how do we stop that demand? Unfortunately for the state of Idaho, unfortunately for our correctional facilities, our medical facilities, etc., we have done a poor job in the state of Idaho. We've taken away that ability to intervene on this. We do not have enough treatment centers. We can't build them fast enough, nor do we have the money to make that happen. But that is one leg of the stool. There's many legs of this stool, how to address this fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin problem. But you can't leave out what you just talked about. We have to find a way to stop the demand, to stop the addiction, right? In the meantime, we have to have, again, you're spot on. We have to find a way to stop the oversupply. Because if people can't catch their breath long enough to not be inundated with these dangerous drugs, we're not going to stop the demand. But if we can slow it down, mandatory minimum, you do this in our state, you're going to prison. We're not talking about the user, we're talking about the trafficker at these levels, with these thresholds that has been put into this bill. But then we have to look at the mental health aspect of it too. Our jails, mine including, are Idaho Department of Corrections, we are flooded. 85, 87% of people in there, mental health issues because of illicit drug use. It's staggering. And I feel so bad for these people. We're doing what we can. We have to, as a society, this society, find a way to put those safeguards in place. It's a multiple legs of the stool. You can't have one without the other. And I know that Gene just talked about that, Ms. Fisher, about, I think it was your question about asking about prosecutorial discretion, or perhaps it was you, Representative, that the officers too have discretion on the streets. And if we find a user that is using, but not a drug trafficker, there are ways to have discretion to not submit charges to the prosecuting attorney. We can't charge anyone. We can submit our charges to the prosecutor, and then the prosecutor has prosecutorial discretion whether to file those charges. So there are some safeguards in place, and I appreciate the testimony. So we have to look at this globally, but in the immediacy, we have to put things in place to help us for the long-term mission.
Thank you very much.
Who was first? Oh, over this side. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Sheriff, welcome. I wanted to ask you about domestic fentanyl thefts from hospitals. It looks to me like just looking through the internet hits.
Representative Gannon, could you speak more into the mic?
You bet. It looks to me like looking at the internet hits that hospitals throughout the country have experienced thefts of fentanyl. Could you first describe how fentanyl is what it's used for in hospitals, and second, how much of a problem are hospital thefts of fentanyl?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, again, excellent question. And because we have to first start with what's the difference between street-level fentanyl that is brought from China, Southeast Asia, India. We've tracked this for years, HSI, DHS, etc. What does that look like on the streets? Shipped out of the analogs coming out of those countries into Mexico, South America, then manufactured into illicit fentanyl. Drastically different than medically, FDA approved, medically administered fentanyl in a hospital setting under medical guidance and care, which I have had on numerous occasions with all my surgeries, right? Drastically different. You're talking watermelons versus cherries here, right? So when we're talking about a pill press that can produce 1 million pills an hour, it's under guard, it's under duress, it's in the jungle. I could show you picture after picture of the jungles where these things are made. There's no FDA regulations. There's no stipulations or parameters. How much fentanyl are we going to put in this thing? We're going to mix it, and God help the next person who gets it. Versus FDA approved, regulated fentanyl, clinical fentanyl that comes in a fentanyl patch, right? So it's pure fentanyl, but it's in it's far less than the 2 milligrams of that lethal dose. So are there thefts? Of course there are, because rather than this person, maybe it's a nurse, maybe it's a orderly, whoever's working there, they have access to it, and they're using it, and they're selling it on the streets, maybe to feed their own habit, maybe just for income. It's happening all over the country, and they're being prosecuted for that. There, a lot of times, my opinion, they'd rather do that, take that risk, than be out on the streets and be seen in the dark alleys where we live and work as law enforcement buying street-level fentanyl. Plus, here again, it's the same thing that we're talking about with this bill. That fentanyl is not going to kill someone at the amounts that they're going to give it. 2 milligrams on the tip of your pencil can kill somebody. So there's lots of reasons that they're doing it. Most of it is money, in my opinion, in my expertise, and then part of it is the addiction of them that they have themselves.
And one follow-up.
Go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman and Sheriff, is that a problem in Idaho? The theft of fentanyl from hospitals contributing to this in Idaho?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Gannon, I do not have that expertise. I think we would be better off to ask someone in the medical profession, hospital directors and others, but I will submit this to you in response to your question. Why do that when it's so easily obtained on the streets at a very small cost? So if you are that person who's worried about being seen out there, that might override losing your job at the hospital and being charged with theft of that dangerous substance. So I can't speak to that exactly, but there's so much on the streets. We can buy it anywhere at any time.
Okay, Representative Ehart. Oh, going in order, Representative.
What?
I'm getting rummy and I'm forgetting your names right now. So.
Whoever.
Representative Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Sheriff Donahue. I'll put both of my questions in one. My first one is can this be made in the United States like how meth dealers make meth, or is it something that's coming, all of it is coming out of the country? And then number two, is there any quick test that law enforcement can do to detect it in the field when there's other drugs involved? Is there any type of a test that's something that kind of like a breathalyzer for fentanyl or not? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Scott, excellent questions, both of them. Let me start with the last question first, because in part, yes, there are ways to do it. There is no field test of sobriety that has been proven to work for our officers in the field, such as a breathalyzer test in the field. So we depend on what we call the DREs, right? Our experts in DREs who can determine if someone is driving under the influence of drugs or alcohol, minus the smell of alcohol, minus the breathalyzer. It's a stigma test of the eyes, et cetera, some other parameters. No one has come up with anything to do that the same that I'm aware of with fentanyl. It's so new, really, if you will. So that really challenges us. I'm going to ask you to just repeat that first part, because I know exactly where I thought I knew where you were going with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Sheriff. Just, can it be made, like meth can be made in the country?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize to that, Representative Scott. Chairman Skog and Representative Scott. Yes, it can, and yes, it is. We have seen quite a migration over the last few years, specifically in 2023, of seizures of clandestine pill press operations throughout the United States, primarily more on the West Coast, the North Pacific coast, but also we're seeing clear back as far as the Eastern Seaboard. And so your answer is absolutely a great question, or your question is absolutely spot on too, because as we saw with meth, what you have to have is the precursor. Now the precursors are coming from China, Southeast Asia. That has been determined. Last state numbers that I saw, probably September, October, it's estimated that China itself has roughly 250 outlaw manufacturing businesses who are ignoring the laws of China, implemented by the government, and still sending those precursors, those analogs. And right now, latest data is 60 to 80 analogs of different fentanyl. 60 to 80. There's not just one type of fentanyl. 60 to 80 analogs. And so the synthetic opioid gets put into out of that country into these other countries, where it's then manufactured in these labs, whether it's in the jungle, whether it's in someone's garage. But we are seeing a huge movement back into the United States where they're manufacturing. I will. The one anecdote, though, the cartels are still controlling it, right? Regardless of who's on this side. So your question is very good, but we're going to see more of it, because from a distribution, operational standpoint, as a business person, as the cartels and their major business, why take the risk of having it seized on the Mexican side of the border coming into the United States when we can get the analogs and products to the American side, manufacture it there, and start our distribution?
Representative Ehart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheriff Donahue, in all honesty, we probably say it a lot, but I do appreciate your being here, and I always get excited watching you on TV. And I do, and I always think, that's our Idaho guy. I also am very supportive of your going to the border and would be supportive of more of our people. This is a national problem that's definitely turned into an Idaho problem. So I have been told, and I think we have been told, that the death rate from fentanyl in Idaho in 2022 was around 188 deaths, and that it doubled in 2023. And so, in all sincerity, in passing this legislation, how shall we understand that it has worked? We had testimony from one of our presenters today, who I respect a great deal, that said in passing this bill, no one will come to Idaho. They won't want to come here. So does that mean we can expect to see less fentanyl and less deaths?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Earhart, first of all, in your numbers, the latest numbers for 2022 is the 188 deaths. I have not seen the numbers for 2023. They haven't that I've seen them in data form. There still will be fentanyl come into this state. The cartels will not give up this tax. And let me use it as a parallelism to the marijuana growth industry. The cartels own numerous licensing in Oregon and Washington. They've gone in and bought the licensings that are available, and those that they don't buy, they still control through fear, intimidation, murder, torture, extortion, using indentured servitude of illegal immigrants that they themselves have brought in place in those places. They're going to do the same thing, and they are doing the same thing with fentanyl. This is a step of this. This is a part of the stool that we're building. We have to build as many safeguards we can in our state region. Something that hasn't been talked about is their northern border. We have just under 2,000 miles, 1,935 miles on the southern border. We have 5,565 miles, if I recall correctly, on the northern border. We have seen a 757% increase of activity on the northern border in the last fiscal year. 757%. I just spoke with our colleagues in Maine and Vermont and primarily New York. We have a northern border too. And we are seeing an inundation of that. So that's why our seizures are so high by Idaho State Police and the task forces in the northern panhandle. It's going to get in here. This is just one leg of the stool. And we have to depend, and I don't speak for the prosecutors, I certainly speak for law enforcement, the discretion of those who are trafficking, submitting charges on people who are trafficking fentanyl. You know, the goal isn't to put all these users or addicts in prison or jail. For God's sakes, we don't have the money, we don't have the room, and it's not the correct thing to do. But we've got to get to the point where we understand that this is killing America. It's destroying the very fabric of this nation. When you have 110,000 people dead, and the numbers that I could give you numbers and numbers over my research and my time on the border, so staggering that we have to do something. And is this a good step? It's a great step. Are we going to improve on that step? I'm certain we are. That's why we have to come together, and we're going to disagree on aspects of this bill, without question. But as a family who has lost people to methamphetamine, who have lost people to fentanyl, death, nothing compares to that. When I have handled the funerals, I've arranged it. There's nothing compares to that. And it can happen to every one of us in this room and in this state, and unfortunately it's going to somehow affect us. So I hope I answered your question. I think that it's paramount. The urgency is beyond the red at this point. This is both a national security issue, but it's really a human safety issue of our society.
Mr. Chairman, one follow-up, and I do so, Mr. Chairman, and Sheriff Donahue, because you and our prior witness in particular are knowledgeable. And so one other, I don't mean to belabor this, but you're probably more qualified than others to answer this. Just another scenario. I shared it with, and my questions actually don't interpret my questions, not you or anyone, as to what I plan to do. I am concerned. And so I'd just like to explore a couple things. I'm worried because fentanyl has increased to such a drastic measure. And yes, I'm glad you answered it as you, because I think what we're hearing out there is we do this and we're not going to have fentanyl. I mean, that's what's really being purported to say, and that's not the case at all. And I'd love us to be more specific in how we use our language. Because of that, I think people like me could be found in a car driving, maybe helping kids or some other people. They're not close friends. We get pulled over. Turns out there's fentanyl. Now, I understand things that we've been told is, you're going to have to prove, but at that moment, if we get pulled over and we're truly innocent in the car with others, for that bit, we're guilty, right? I mean, what's going to happen to someone like me at that point with your experience? What do I have to go through to be proven innocent?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Earhart, another great question. It's constructive possession is basically what you're referring to. And again, I'm not the prosecutors in the room. There's plenty of them. But constructive possession, you're in the vicinity in this car. You had no knowledge that that person's carrying that fentanyl, for instance. Yes, could you be charged? Yes, you could be charged. You could have the officer submit charges to the prosecutor on that. I think that's really on the low end of possibilities or occurrences, I should say, because again, your law enforcement, not just in the state of Idaho, but everywhere, they're a little bit sharper than that. They use discretion. They have their training experience, and their job is to get to the fact, and their job is not to judge. Their job is to submit those facts to a higher level, which is the prosecutor. And so I'm glad you bring it up. We're still going to have this coming in. We really are. And it was talked about how, to your point, people being in possession or people being in close proximity to those drugs. Here's a real danger part that we haven't talked a lot about today. And I think it was opened up by the sponsor of the bill. Officers are being injured as well as people by fentanyl, by street-level fentanyl. It goes back to Representative Gannon's question on the difference between street-level and FDA-approved. I've personally, in my jail, last year had, on 2 occurrences, 1 occurrence, 2 males, deputies, masks and gloves on, processing an individual coming into jail, opened his wallet, powdered fentanyl throughout. That's where he was carrying it. Airborne particles. Both deputies tipped over backwards, immediately unconscious. My medical team at the jail administered Narcan. Both were ambulatory. Both got to the hospital, treated. 1 deputy went under again, became unconscious. Medical personnel administered a Narcan drip for a period of hours to save his life. 2 weeks later, 2 females, same scenario, same situation, both ambulatory, 1 Narcan drip to save her life. This is happening on your streets. It's happening in your jails. It's happening in prisons because we get contraband in prisons. We get contraband in jail, and people are dying in our jails and in our prisons. Whether we want to hear that or not, they're doing it. They've died in my jail because contraband gets in, and they take and they overdose, and they die. This is how serious it is, even when we have all these safeguards. So, yes, my opinion is we need to take the next step.
Okay, there's 2 lights on. I'm not going to accept any more than these 2, but this witness, Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Sheriff Donahue. So I just had a quick question. At the beginning of your testimony, you said some numbers of the amount of fentanyl that has crossed the border. Could you just repeat that for me?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Representative Dixon, I apologize. Here's the numbers. These are 2023 DEA numbers that DEA has put out in their reports. most recently, seizures on the borders. And when we say the border, it's both borders, right? 76,500,000 fentanyl-laced fake pills. 19,000 pounds of fentanyl powder. And their 2023 just came out. DEA lab analysis has moved from 6 out of every 10 pills on the street being a deadly dose to 7 out of every 10 pills on the street being a deadly dose. So, those numbers alone by U.S. intelligence estimates that the drug trafficking organizations are trafficking 4 times the amount of seizures that we're getting. We're missing that much on those seizures. And one number I didn't give earlier, and I'll do it right now. Just those numbers of the powder and the fentanyl pills, just those 2 numbers, based on DEA analysis of 2 milligrams is a lethal, anything over 2 milligrams lethal dose, that's over 384 million lethal doses that they've intercepted in 2023 alone. That can kill most all the Americans today. That's what they intercepted. But we're missing 4 times that amount, according to U.S. intelligence.
Representative Allgood.
Thank you, Sheriff. I think we can pretty much consider you an expert on the subject. It's been testified here today that strong penalties for crime is not a deterrent. And I would just like you to respond to that, if you would, please.
Mr. Chair and Representative Allgood, I would argue that point, quite frankly. I think it is a strong deterrent. If we look at, for every action, there's a reaction. First of all, you're dealing with human beings. We are creatures of habit. We are creatures of repetition. But we also understand the accountability aspect. Somewhere in our brains, we can all understand, no matter what level you are at, right? From the user level to the dealer level, when we're talking strictly about fentanyl, there is a percentage, there is that level of knowledge and observation that if I do this, this could happen. And no one in their right mind wants to go to jail or prison. No one. It just simply doesn't exist. Are there bad decisions that get them there? Absolutely. Every day, every hour, right now. But I do believe strongly that talking over 20 years of this business and talking and working undercover for nearly 7 years and on those same task forces when you were in office and others, when you talk to those people, when you get them in a room or you get them on the side of the road and they break it down mentally, they know what that consequence is. And I have seen them change their ways. I have seen hardcore addicts. I have seen hardcore drug traffickers. This is your last chance. You're going away for 20 to 30 years. I have seen them, the light come on, and they're saying, you know what? This is going to affect me and my family the rest of my life. And they do change. So I do think it's a deterrent. Is it the deterrent? Is it the highest level? Is it 100%? Of course not. I wish it was. I wish it was. We probably wouldn't be having this conversation. But the reality is they're human beings and they understand accountability, and for every action, there's a reaction.
Okay. Sheriff Donahue, thank you for your testimony very much. We're going to break for 10 minutes, go at ease. And as a request, there's lobbyists like a hornet's nest around lately, and I would ask that you leave my committee members alone. And my committee members, please don't lobby each other for 10 minutes, all right? I can't enforce that, I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hardware and closed captioning for Idaho in Session is provided by the Idaho Legislature and Idaho Legislative Services Office. Additional funding is provided by the Idaho Public Television Endowment.
Okay. All right. So that means it pops up here. We're called back to order from being at ease, and I'm waiting for a name to pop up on the screen.
Anticipation. This is where we hit the emergency.
Where's our person? Well, we took a break and it's not working, but I have the names of the people I'm going to call. We're not going to get to all of the witnesses today. If you're towards the bottom of the list, I apologize, but we're just not going to keep the committee here that long. We have our North Idaho people, our East Idaho people need to get home safely, not knowing what the weather will be on the roads. I'll try a different name. All right, we'll have to use my stopwatch or somebody else next to me. Next up, let's have Jennifer Zielinski. Is Jennifer Zielinski in the room? If you're in the other room, head this way. We'll call you when you get here. Okay. That's it. Yeah. So no response from Jennifer Zielinski, who is against the passage of the bill. is Kate Heil, Heil. Oh, good. We can get started.
All right.
Go ahead and tell us who you are and if you represent anyone and where you live.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Dr. Kate Heil. I am a family medicine and addiction medicine physician in Boise and Nampa, and I am here to represent myself. I'd like to say that I am, again, representing myself and not representing the views of the organization that I work for. So like I said, I'm a primary care and addiction medicine physician in Boise and Nampa, so both Ada and Canyon County. I am against this bill, and I would like to...
Mr. Chairman, I am so sorry. I can't quite understand her.
Oh, sorry. I have a really soft voice.
Just get right up next to that microphone. I do the same thing.
Okay.
Good job, Representative Mathias.
Thank you. Sorry, I have a soft voice. So I would like to advocate against this bill. So I have a lot of patients who are involved with the criminal justice system, whether that be currently or after they are released from prison. And I think that the difficulty with this bill is it doesn't necessarily differentiate between folks who are using low-level amounts and then those who are using big amounts of fentanyl. So just to kind of quantify what my patients tell me is I can have patients who are using anywhere from like 3 to 6 pills per day up to about 30 pills per day. So 100 pills per day 100 pills would be about 3 days worth. And then to quantify the amount of grams, I've had people tell me anywhere from like 0.5 gram to 1.5 grams, with about 1 gram being an average. What I am also kind of worried about is this doesn't allow the judge to make a decision kind of based on what the person, their intent is. We do know also that there is a fair amount of substance use in prison. About 65% of folks who are imprisoned do meet criteria for a substance use disorder, and up to about 19% report regular use of opioids while they're in prison. We do know that the opioid overdose risk is about 10 to 12 times the amount of the general population once somebody gets out of prison. So I think that we, as a physician, we always think about what are our next steps, what are we going to do?
We need to wrap up.
Okay. And if this bill does pass, how are we going to improve treatment for these folks if they do get into prison?
Thank you. Are there any questions of the testifier? Thank you for your time. No questions.
Thanks.
Gus Powell. Is Gus Powell here? Oh, strike that, Gus. Hold on a second. Jennifer Zielinski, welcome. You know the drill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Zielinski. I'm here from Boise, and I'm representing the Idaho Anti-Trafficking Coalition.
Name again?
Idaho Anti-Trafficking Coalition.
Thank you.
Yes. So I echo pretty much everything that everyone is saying today, but we do come from a little bit of a different perspective. So what's important is holding individuals accountable for selling dangerous drugs like fentanyl. It is equally important to acknowledge the complex circumstances some individuals find themselves in. Human trafficking victims, for instance, may be coerced and forced into selling drugs, including fentanyl. These individuals are often vulnerable and lack freedom of choice. Implementing strict penalties such as mandatory minimum sentences without considering the circumstances and potential victimization of the offenders can lead to unjust outcomes. These victims may face lengthy prison terms despite having been forced into committing illegal acts against their will. To ensure fairness and protect innocent individuals caught up in these situations, lawmakers should advocate for comprehensive approaches that address the root causes of drug trafficking. These include supporting policies that focus on victim support and rehabilitation rather than solely relying on punitive measures. Victims of human trafficking are often coerced and forced into drug use as a means of control by their traffickers. They may be given drugs to create dependency or addiction, making it easier for traffickers to manipulate them. Victims are frequently exploited as drug mules, transporting and dealing drugs as part of the traffickers' illegal activities. This not only puts them at risk of legal repercussions, but also allows the traffickers to profit from their victimization. Finally, traffickers may force victims to commit crimes such as drug trafficking, theft, or fraud, often directly linked to the exploitation they are subjected to. We estimate 65 to 70% of the victims that we've served have been used as drug mules by their traffickers. We just ask that you consider various factors, including the impacts on victims. Thank you.
Any questions? See no questions. Thank you for your testimony, your patience waiting to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Now, Mr. Powell. I called you Gus earlier. I apologize. I don't know if we've met or not before. So welcome to committee. You know the drill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Gus Powell. I'm a native Idahoan. I have 2 teenagers, live in Meridian. I'm here representing myself. Over the past 20 years, as a certified registered nurse anesthesiologist, I've been practicing anesthesia in an independent setting. And one of the things I want to do is to provide some context for, the other drugs that are on the mandatory minimum list, and we hear pounds and kilos, and we're talking about grams and milligrams today. And I'm even going to take it a little bit farther and lift micrograms. In giving anesthesia on a daily basis, the fentanyl situation in our society, many patients, when they ask what they're getting and I say fentanyl, their eyes are in distress. I have to reassure them and let them know of what I am doing. And so from 4 grams on this bill, that is 4 million micrograms. And the lethal dose per DEA is 2 milligrams, which is 2,000 micrograms. My typical dosing for an average surgery is anywhere from 1 to 200 micrograms. Okay, so it was stated earlier, that's 2,000 lethal doses. Now, just 1 lethal dose is more than I would give doing anesthetic for an open heart surgery. And the fentanyl by itself is the big name, but there's also others included, such as sufentanil and carfentanil, among others. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin, but sufentanil is 10 times more potent than fentanyl, and carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl. This drug, even in our hands in the controlled setting, doses that I give, I noticeably see with controlled monitors, oxygen, et cetera, changes in respiratory rate, et cetera. And we have reversal drugs on hand. I trust our law enforcement and our prosecutors and their judgment, just as I would hope all of us would trust me and my colleagues in our judgment when you trust us to do your anesthetic. And I support this bill.
Sorry, I wasn't watching the timer. I'm not sure how far you went over, but that
Just a second or two.
All right. I'll take your word for it. Any questions? Representative Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Powell, I'm not sure that I'm hung up on the quantities that you're pointing to in the bill, but I am deeply troubled by language in the bill that would make this apply to 4 grams of any mixture that includes any detectable amount of fentanyl. Can you tell me what you know about what that phrase means, any detectable amount of fentanyl? How tiny of a particle of fentanyl can be detected?
Chairman Scott, Representative Cannon, thank you for the question. I'm not qualified to answer that question. I give fentanyl and a myriad of drugs in a short amount of time with an anesthetic, and I see those synergistic effects, but I feel that's a legal prosecutor type question, so I don't feel I'm qualified to answer.
I really appreciate you coming in with your expertise. I learned a few things from you, and I appreciate it. Thank you for waiting and being patient.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee.
Regina Simpson, are you in the room or in the other room?
Mr. Chairman, she submitted it by email, I believe.
Oh, all right. And by the way, committee members are good. Attaché has put things in your folder that you can look at over the weekend and You'll be able to see those written testimonies been sent in. Matt Clifford.
Well, my notes say good morning, but yeah. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Matt Clifford, and I'm the sheriff of Ada County. As most of you know, prior to being elected sheriff, I have worked for the last 21 years as a deputy here in Ada County, with a lot of time on the street as a canine handler that worked hundreds of drugs investigations. During my time in law enforcement, I have not seen a scarier drug trend than fentanyl. I'm here today to support this bill for both my office and for the Idaho Sheriff's Association. Most of what I have written down has already been exhausted. I think what I'd really like to put forward is, we hear a lot of things, a lot of testimonies, but remember, we are talking about adding a dangerous drug to the list of already dangerous drugs that we have that are in our Idaho State Code. A drug that is more dangerous than, that we would consider more dangerous than cocaine and meth and heroin. Our drug laws here are some of the toughest in the nation, and I do believe that it is a deterrence. You've heard testimony of, it sounds like Miami Vice, but the drug cartels pay attention to what we are doing state to state, and they know here in this state there are higher penalties for dealing drugs and bringing large quantities into our state. So I would urge you to support the bill. I'd love to take the rest of my time to answer any questions that you may have already asked, because quite frankly, some of the questions are technically incorrect. Some of the answers are technically incorrect, and I'm here for whatever you have.
Representative Mathias.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sheriff Clifford, thanks for being here this afternoon and this morning. So this is a question that I don't think has been asked of anyone who's testified, but it's a common theme that we've heard over and over, and that is all of us want to target the traffickers. None of us want to target I'll call them simple users. Why is there so much reluctance to add language that would clarify that legislative intent and make sure that we're not scooping up people who might have 100 pills, but we're talking about the people who might have 100 pills and cash and scales and baggies and guns and incriminating texts, and the evidence that I think some people on this committee would like to see to help us be more comfortable that we aren't going to use this law to just scoop up users?
Chairman, Representative Mathias, I think that's a great question. I think when I looked at this and some of the things that people were against and people were for, and some of the things that I just kind of heard is, I think we inadvertently want to tell stories in our state code. Some of the questions that were even asked and all the situations that are, well, what if this, what if that? Our state code is not for the stories behind what is happening to the individual. It's a guideline for us as law enforcement and for prosecutors to say, do we charge this person with this crime based on the story that we see before us? So I do understand your question, and I think that it's much simpler to say, this is the penalty if you have these large quantities, instead of tell the story of every user that says, well, if you can have large quantities if this is what your habit is, you can have large quantities if this is what your habit is. That's up to us as law enforcement and prosecutors to work together to realize, is this person really a user? And I've experienced that in my time, somebody with a trafficking amount of drugs that actually was a user, and you go forward accordingly. I think we want to take when we ask the scenario questions, a lot of people want law enforcement officers to be robots until it's time for them to not be a robot, and it's hard to have both. The law is a guideline for us to say, this is what's sitting in front of us. It's not black and white. It's not a little ticker tape's not going to fly out of our brains and say, you get charged with this because of black and white. Every situation we run into is differently. For example, we'll oversimplify it. Speed limit, right? Well, the law says that you have to drive the posted speed limit. What it doesn't say is, well, if your wife's in labor, then you might speed a little bit. or if you're having a medical problem, your mom's on her deathbed, so you might speed a little bit. It's up to us as law enforcement officers to say, hey, you're speeding. Hey, my wife is pregnant. You're right. I mean, probably we shouldn't give you a speeding ticket. So that's kind of the answer I have. It's a guideline for us to say what's really happening here. The prosecutors use it as well, and we do work together with the prosecutors to do what's right by our citizens.
Representative Allgood.
Thank you for being here, Sheriff.
Thank you.
It's been brought up today, and as an experienced law enforcement officer, you encounter 4 or 5 ounces of marijuana. Somehow, you detect that marijuana may have some fentanyl in it. Are you going to charge that person with possessing 5 ounces of fentanyl?
Chairman Skog and Representative, that is all. I really appreciate you asking that question because I'm not sure it was answered correctly before. The answer is no. The use behind the mixtures thereof, that's because when almost any drug that you have here in Idaho, not all of them, but most of the time when you get large quantities, I don't care if it's meth or cocaine or fentanyl, it's going to be cut with something, right? It's been stepped on, like Donahue said. So we take it in its totality, not we have 5 ounces of marijuana and it is now 5 ounces of fentanyl. I think that's a great story to tell, to think that is going to happen. I don't think I would know any officer on the street that would say, well, we're going to charge them with 5 ounces of fentanyl because it's a mixture of marijuana and fentanyl. I understand the concern. It's not reality.
Representative Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Sheriff Clifford. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you said about the intent and the lack of it in this legislation, that you, as the initial finder of the person, that you have some discretion and you will use your own discretion to choose the path where this is going to go. Is that correct? Do I understand that correctly?
Chairman and Representative, absolutely. And the reverse is true as well. So let's say I use my discretion to say, hey, I think this has happened, and then the prosecutor has a bigger look at it and maybe more investigation is even done. They can actually, they can bring the charge up if they need to. So it's not just my choice. We kind of work as a team to figure out what's the whole story. I'll give you a great example. Years ago, and this also answers a question from previously, pulled over a car. He's got 5 grams of, or no, he had almost, it's like half an ounce of heroin in the car, okay? Well, that is traffic amounts here in Boise, right? It's very trafficking here. Well, he's not from here. He's from California, and he had just gotten here. In California, that's not trafficking. And so he brought it here to use because he knew he could get heroin cheaper in California and bring it here to Idaho and use it and not deal with it. Now, my interviews with him, the investigation in total tells me, yes, that is correct. It's still a felony to possess it, but he is not here to sell it. So that's the discretion I have.
Representative Cannon.
Thank you, Chairman. Sheriff Clifford. So I'm a big fan of the American criminal justice system, and one of the unique things about it, not only compared to other systems in the world, but also just compared to other things that we encounter in American life, is that it is a system that works with checks and balances of all 3 branches of government and of the people. And what I mean by that is, in a typical case, you've got your folks, law enforcement folks, part of the executive branch, investigating crimes and so forth. You've got prosecutors, part of the executive branch, prosecuting crimes. You've got us, legislators, who are passing these laws. And you've got the judicial branch involved through sentencing and through judicial discretion at sentencing. And you've got the people involved who
have the right to be jurors and to kind of act as an ultimate check and balance on the whole system. In this law, we are taking away the involvement to some extent of the judicial branch and its discretion and giving that discretion to the executive branch, to you folks and the prosecutors. And we are, as a legislature, acting in a way for the jury. We're saying
Representative Cannon, is this a question or a long argument?
This is a question, but it is a long question.
Wrap it up.
Thank you. We are saying through this law, if we pass it, that under certain circumstances, namely the weights listed here, that we are making the determination that is typically the jury determination as to intent. We're saying if you have X, you have intent. I'd like you to, I hear what you're saying about prosecutorial discretion and law enforcement discretion. Do you feel like it's necessary to take away judicial discretion and the check that provides, and the discretion of the jury and the check that provides?
Chairman and Representative Cannon, great question. I understand exactly what you're saying, because I do believe in that whole system as well and have preached it forever about legislation makes the laws, I enforce the laws, judiciary finds if they are constitutional. So I'd say yes and no. I don't think we take away the judiciary discretion because we do have the jury portion of it, right? We have the jurors and the judicial that can determine if that law is, if it's even valid that that person has been charged with that crime. I hear the other part of it to say, well, now there's no judicial discretion on how they get sentenced, correct? So it doesn't take away the discretion on if that person is guilty or not. So there's the judicial part doing what it does. I do have concerns with so much discretion at the hands of one single person, because even my discretion as a law enforcement officer on the street doesn't mean that, hey, this is it. We have a big inconsistency with our judicial system. Nothing against judges. They're great people. They work hard and they make good decisions. But here we can at least say it's not going to be one person that determines what your sentence is. It's the Idaho law that now says that you will be sentenced to this. Now, you really would take away the judiciary if we said, well, it's unconstitutional and we're not going to allow a judge to determine if it's unconstitutional. I think that's where you take away discretion or judicial discretion.
Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sheriff. We got one more.
One more, Sheriff.
I couldn't see your light the way it's
Well,
tilted.
Sorry. Over here.
Representative Roten.
Mr. Chairman and Sheriff Clifford, I'll try not to be as long. Some of the reason that we hear some people argue against this, it seems, is that the prosecutors' dockets are already full, the dance card's full, and the jails are full. I understand now, this is what I understand, is that mandatory minimum convictions only make up 4% of our prison population at this time. That being said, one, is that number correct? And two, would there be room for these new, if there is an increase in convictions? It seems like an odd defense, but I thought perhaps, is there room at the end for if we come across this?
Chairman, Representative Roten, great question. I would say that there's not room anywhere in the state of Idaho in a jail or prison. I'm just being very frank. But I don't think that should deter us from justice. As a sheriff, it's a really strange double-edged sword. I've said it for years and years to say, you turn to your patrol and you say, go catch the bad guys, arrest the people that shouldn't be on the street, that are victimizing people, all that, and then they get in your jail and you say, how do we get these people out of our jail? Well, I'm not willing to give up justice and public safety because I need space in my jail. I want space in my jail, and I have to take care of those people and make sure they're cared for. But I'm not going to kick them out into the public just because I don't want to hold them. They need to be, again, brought to justice, held accountable. As far as are the numbers going to, I don't know the answer to your 4%. I don't know the answer. I'm sorry. I don't have that statistic. The answer to will arrests go up? I don't know. It's meant to be a deterrent. So in a perfect world, arrests would go down because then we would have less fentanyl that comes in. What I do believe is a deterrent like mandatory minimums causes the less fentanyl availability in our society. We've seen it with other things that we've put into place by law here in Idaho. And I believe that it will work with this too. I believe there will be a deterrent. So, we're not going to have an increase in 4%, I wouldn't believe, but I'm also not a crystal ball.
Now, thank you, Sheriff.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. Let's see. It is my plan to take 2 more witnesses for the day. Trevor Chadwick, are you in the room? Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Chairman, and esteemed members of the committee. I had to, obviously, to follow your rules, I changed a lot of things on here, so.
Okay, remember, state your name and where you're from.
Yep,
who you
my name is
represent.
Trevor Chadwick. I'm from the city of Star. I am the mayor, and I just represent my community. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify in support of this bill. Fentanyl is a major problem in our state, and it doesn't care about our political affiliation, your religion, or your status in society. Fentanyl will kill everyone equally. In Star, we have put together a team of officers to focus on stopping these drugs from entering our community through the 3 major highways that go through our city. Daily, they make traffic stops finding drugs in vehicles. They find fentanyl, they find drugs laced with fentanyl mixed by uneducated chemists. They find a pill form, they find it in powder form, in candy form, and even now they're finding it in this purple pill form that they have been talking about. Those that are bringing this into our community are missing it to entice or even younger folks to try it. We must take action now to stop this drug from entering our communities or slow it down, our neighborhoods, schools, and homes. House Bill 406 is the bill that will start this process. Fentanyl is the only narcotic without a mandatory minimum, and we continue to see an increase of this drug on our streets and deaths in our community. I would encourage each and every one of you to visit our amazing police officers throughout the state, go on ride-alongs, talk to them about the challenges they're facing with this drug, witness firsthand the chaos fentanyl is creating in our communities. I often ride with my officers and my chief to gain firsthand knowledge with my boots on the ground. I do have a story I can tell you later if you want, but I'll hold off on that. I believe musician Jelly Roll, that was brought up earlier, who testified in Congress last week, said it best. There are about 190 fentanyl-related deaths daily in the United States. This is equivalent to one 747 plane full of people crashing every day. Can you imagine the uproar that we would have here among this body and other bodies in the United States if we see a plane crash daily killing people on board? And I think Representative Earhart brought up a statistic. It was like 200 something, I believe, that she said in Idaho a year in 2022. That's a plane crash every year in the state of Idaho killing people in Idaho, right? Let's take a stand for our communities and our citizens, our friends, our families, and pass House Bill 406, which will help keep this deadly drug out of our communities, schools, and homes. And let's not forget that dealers are users. Am I out? I'm sorry.
You have to wrap up.
I could be done, but I just got a couple more statements. 4 grams can kill 2,000 people. 40 grams can kill my entire city, right? Or that's 40 packets of sugar, as someone was talking about out here.
I need you to wrap up.
Thank you. Any
Thank
questions?
you. Are there questions of the mayor?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much
it.
for your patience being here today. And the last witness is Grant Lobes. Mr. Lobes.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome to committee. You know the drill.
My name is Grant Lobes. I'm the representative today for the Idaho Prosecuting Attorneys Association. I am the prosecutor in Twin Falls County, where I have been for 30 years. And for those 30 years, I've been dealing with drug prosecutions of all different kinds of drugs. And there has never been a drug as more dangerous, that is more dangerous and more prevalent than fentanyl has become in our state. It is not only coming here, it is here. In Twin Falls County, in the last year, we had 2 cases with over 16 pounds of fentanyl being trafficked through our county, which was enough to kill everybody in Idaho, everybody in Montana, and everybody in Wyoming in 2 stops. So it's here, and it's here to stay, and it's up to us to do something about it. We have to keep in mind at all times when we're dealing with these kind of questions that drug dealing is a business. This is a cash business. This makes people rich beyond your wildest imaginations. These people in the cartels make business decisions like members of the board of directors of IBM. They sit around and they decide what is going to maximize their profit. And what maximizes their profit is moving large amounts into places where it can be sold for large amounts of money. One of the most insidious things they do to maximize their profit is cutting the fentanyl, so they have a little bit of fentanyl, and has been mentioned here today, they sprinkle it in marijuana or something else. You get a bigger high, you like it, it also might kill you. So that's extremely dangerous. My job every morning when I wake up is to make Twin Falls County and Idaho safer for its citizens. You can make Idaho safer for its citizens by passing this bill to help make Idaho a less attractive market for drug traffickers. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
Speak into the mic if you would.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman and Prosecutor Lobes. Appreciate you being here. And I'd like to get to the issue I think that is most telling or is most significant with regard to this bill, because I agree with almost everything, everything that's being said about how dangerous fentanyl is. We've got to do something. We've got to pass a bill. All there. Okay. But on line 32 through 33, it says, or any mixture or substance containing a detectable amount of any such substance. And by substance, referring to the fentanyl, is guilty of a felony. And then there's the categories, and the first one is 4 grams, which is very little, as we've discussed today. My concern is that the detectable amount of such substance could be very, very minimal, and therefore a user is the one that is subject to this statute as opposed to a trafficker. Could you comment? And that's my concern. I'm not saying I've concluded yet, but that's my concern. And I've got a copy of the bill if
I've got it here.
Got that.
I think we got the question.
That's it. If you could comment on that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, obviously that's been an issue that's been discussed several times here today. And again, let me tell you, every state that has this kind of language, this kind of statute, has this language about mixture. Because when you're in the drug business, as I was alluded to just a minute ago, you further your profits the more you dilute your product. As long as your product has a hit for people, they'll buy it. And if you can sell a little bit in a big bit of marijuana, or even in cocaine or in something else, then you're going to make more of a profit. So eliminating that mixture language would require us to have a much larger amount of concentrated fentanyl, and it also helps the cartels make more money. I mean, you're just buying into their business practice. It would be like being at their boardroom table and saying, "Hey, I got an idea. Why don't we put a little bit in a big, inert substance and make a lot more money?" They'll let us do that in Idaho. Why don't we do that? It furthers their interest if we do that. We have to be able to prosecute based on the fentanyl-tainted whole, rather than just trying to find a tiny little bit of fentanyl that's in there. And there won't be such a tiny amount in there that you can't measure it. In order to make some marijuana helpful to the person who's seeking the extra high. You have to put enough fentanyl in there that it actually has a kick to it. And so you're not talking about just a tiny little bit. And this question has come up a couple times before too. What if we find a person that's got 4 grams of marijuana and there's some fentanyl in it? I need to know more about that case. I need to know who put the fentanyl there. I need to know why do they have the fentanyl-laced marijuana? I need to know what they're doing with it, because the people who sell that in that quantity, in that packaging with the marijuana, are doing it with a very horrible consequence and a deliberate consequence. And so, yeah, if we catch a person that's got a marijuana cigarette and they're smoking, they've got fentanyl, and we arrest them, maybe we save their life. If we catch somebody who's got a large quantity of it and they're selling it to other people, maybe we stop them from killing other people. And that's what's behind this bill.
One follow-up?
Yes, please. Okay, but I'd like to get specifically to 4 grams of marijuana, which is a very, very small amount of marijuana, correct? Well, I don't want to be, I'm not supposed to do that.
It'd be a lot for me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, okay. But it's, well, how much is 4 grams? How much is 4 grams of marijuana?
I would ask one of my sheriff's colleagues to tell me, but, a small amount. Let's call it a small amount for user purposes.
Okay. And so
Is this a third question?
Well, it is, yeah, well.
We want to get out of here, so that's the end of the question.
But I think this is the most important.
All right, Representative Gannon.
Issue that.
Leeway, ask the question.
Okay. Okay, so we've got a small amount of marijuana, and it has a detectable amount of fentanyl in it, whatever that, and that could be very, very small. And so, is that enough to find that someone who has actual or constructive possession of it, as defined in our jury instructions, and knows that they have possession, and know they have possession, is that enough to make them a trafficker? That's all I'm asking.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, it is technically under the statute, yes, because that's the way the statute, you've quoted the black and white of it, that's what it says. There might be times when that would be an unwise charge to bring. There might be times, as the Sheriff Clifford just said, when you wouldn't charge that because you've got like some kid who just bought this from somebody and he didn't even know it had, fentanyl in it, and he's just innocently going about trying to get high on marijuana. I wouldn't charge that. My sheriff wouldn't charge that. I don't know who would charge that. But there might be times when you catch the person who's about to sell it to the kid on the school ground, and that person, there's a completely different thing going on there. And we don't want to cast our net so small that we can't catch that person. The point of this language is to make sure that we defeat the cartel business model of diluting their product by adding inert ingredients to it, and thereby saying, hey, I didn't really have that much, I only had this much. No, you had this whole amount, because you were going to sell this whole amount, and you were going to make this much profit on this whole amount, and you were going to kill this many people with it. So that's the point of this, and as I said, this language is pretty standard across the country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lobes. I'm wondering if you can just walk us through briefly the process from the time someone is arrested to when would they receive a mandatory minimum sentence? When would that happen in the process?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Dixon, that differs. It depends on what path they take. I don't think everybody wants to listen to my how the criminal justice system works lecture because it's a long one. But in general, they are arrested on probable cause that they have committed a crime. Maybe the officers know at the time that they have a trafficking amount of fentanyl. Maybe they don't. Maybe they have to send something to the lab and we have to wait for the lab test to get back. In any case, at some point in that whole process, the prosecutor makes the charge, charges it as a trafficking charge. Once it's charged as a trafficking charge, I think Representative Cannon was mentioning earlier, there is a possibility for a plea agreement that's reached, depending on a whole bunch of other factors. But if it gets to sentencing after a conviction or a plea of guilty as a trafficking charge, that's when the mandatory minimum is applied by the judge, who also has discretion to go above that. That's a minimum, and so the judge can give a greater sentence. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Allgood.
Thank you, sir. This committee, I sense, shares some concern on a wide body. We have discussion here of cartels and how much money they're making and the tactics they're using, and so we want to prosecute these criminals that are trafficking in our drug. But at the clear other end of the perspective, we've heard concerns expressed about high school kids at a party and somebody passes out a pill that turns out to be fentanyl and the disastrous results that could be there. And so what I'm asking is, could you elaborate on prosecutorial discretion when you're looking at the wide margins that you would see between these different crimes?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Allgood, of course I can. It's very complex because every single decision that a prosecutor makes, just like every single decision that a policeman makes or a judge makes, is based on the specific circumstances of a case. So I would need to have all the facts. So I've heard some, hypotheticals being asked today, and it just depends on exactly what's happening. But if you have a person who, first of all, if they don't know that they have fentanyl, they can't be charged under this statute because you have to know that it's fentanyl. So set that part aside, because you can't be a completely innocent person who says, well, I just thought I had, a brownie. No, that person wouldn't be guilty of trafficking of fentanyl, no matter how much fentanyl is in that brownie, because he has to know it's fentanyl. So take that aside. So as a prosecutor, I would look to see, can I prove that the person knew that they had fentanyl? Okay, and then I have to ask, did the fentanyl or the inert amount, the inert ingredient that the fentanyl is mixed in equal the trafficking amount? If so, then I would still look at other things to say, what are the circumstances of this case? If this person knew they had fentanyl but thought it was just the tiniest amount and they were only use it for themselves, and I had some, proof as to their, what kind of a person they were and what they were doing and what they were caught up in, it might not be charged as a trafficking case. The police probably wouldn't charge it as a trafficking case, as the sheriff just mentioned a minute ago. But, there are all kinds of factors with the same exact type of ingredient, the same exact amount in the same exact brownie or marijuana cigarette where I would charge it if I believed that that was a case that needed to have this kind of deterrent leveled against it. So it's very difficult to answer every single tiny little what if this, what if that hypothetical, because everything is fact dependent. But the thing is that these kinds of mandatory minimums deter the people we want to deter. They deter the big dealers, they deter the cartels, because, as I said, everything they do is business based. They don't want to go to prison for 10 years. They don't want their lieutenants to go to prison for 10 years, because, in every business, manpower costs you money. So the point here is to put this bill into place to let the drug dealers know that we're serious about this, that if you deal in large quantities in the state of Idaho, you are going to get hammered, and therefore, being intelligent human beings and in a business to make money, they will say, why bother with Idaho? Let's just go next door. Let's go to Utah where they don't care. Let's go to Nevada where they don't care. Let's go to any state surrounding Idaho where they don't care. We'll make just as much money and we won't go to prison for 10 years. Thank you.
I believe, is there a light down here? Oh. Representative Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Lopes. As you've spoken to the concerns around the mixture language, it sounds like you, as a prosecutor, would personally want to look at whether the person was simply a user or a simple user, however we want to term that, or whether they were actually intending to distribute. I've been on this committee for a while now. We've had this conversation more than once, and I know that there's some frustration in this room about the fact that we have not yet taken action. This question around intent has been a central question from my observation among members of this committee. So you indicate that you, as a prosecutor, would want to look at the intent of the individual involved. And yet I've been told that intent to distribute or intent to deliver language is a non-starter, absolutely off the table, non-negotiable, will not look at this language. I cannot understand the resistance to intent to distribute language, and I would really like to.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Young, what I was talking about was the extremely tiny marginal cases. The case which you've presented to us in some hypotheticals today, where there isn't anything going on here except a individual user wanting to get high in this particular case, and they just happen to have some fentanyl. That, if you take out the intent, if you add intent language to this whole statute, here's what I'll be able to do if I'm a fentanyl distributor or dealer. I'll be able to have 500,000 pills in my house. And when you knock on my door and your dog sniffs it and they come up and they say, "Oh my God, Grant, you've got 500,000 fentanyl pills in your house. We're charging you with trafficking." I'm just keeping it. I don't intend to do anything with it. Prove that I intend to do anything with it. Idaho State Supreme Court has said that you may not use the amount as the proof that I have intent to sell. So if you add intent to it, then all I have to do as a big-time dealer, producer, manufacturer is just not say anything to you when you knock at my door. Because how are you going to prove that my bedroom stacked floor to ceiling with fentanyl pills is intended for anything? See, the problem is the fact that I have that much is obvious to any reasonable person. I intend to sell it, right? The Supreme Court says, no, I have to prove something more than that. I can't just prove the amount. So if you add intent to this, then large shipments, large quantities of drugs will not be prosecutable as trafficking, because we won't be able to prove the intent, because these people are going to be smart enough to tell their people, don't ever say anything about your intent. Don't ever have any ledgers. Don't ever have any records of where it came from and where you're going to take it. And if we don't have those things, we can't prosecute under an intent statute.
Chairman has a question, and this is an ongoing discussion between many of us, and I've heard it said that the amount is the intent in this statute and for law enforcement. Is that correct?
Well, that's one way of putting it. I don't think that the amount is, quote, the intent, because there's no intent language, no specific intent in this statute. You have the intent to have that amount. And if you have an amount that is greater than the trafficking amount, then that is all that is needed to prove that you are trafficking. So you don't have to intend to do anything but have that amount. Yes, if that answers your question.
Thank you. Hey,
Well, you guys let me off easy.
You did all right. We're all tired. Good job. Thank you for traveling here from Twin Falls. Okay, committee, that concludes our testimony. We are going to meet on this on Tuesday. That's our next meeting day. And at that time, we will discuss, see if there's any motions, and take action at that time. Representative Mathias.
Mr. Chairman, for a comment?
Say again?
For a comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to share this comment because we have the luxury of having some time to think about what we've heard today and how we might want to, how it might inform our decision next week. And I know you are a student of history, you know I am a student of history, and I think there's two historical events that I think should inform how we reason through this over the next few days. The first historical event was a pretty determinative dinner that happened in an Argentinian hotel room on or around December 2nd, 2018.
Are we getting into argument?
No, we are not, Mr. Chair. In that meeting, the President of the United States finally convinced the president of China to deschedule fentanyl. This is something we'd been trying to do for a long time. And we knew at the time, because DEA agents testified in the summer of 2018, that if we do this, if we convince China to deschedule or reschedule fentanyl, that they are no longer going to be able to ship it directly to the United States ports all up and down the West Coast. But they're not going to give up, because as we heard earlier, every decision has a reaction. And we knew that it was going to be sent to Mexico, to the cartels, and to Chinese cartels in Vancouver. So it didn't used to get cut before. None of this, the policy decisions matter, and we need to get this right, is my point. The second historical event is the crack epidemic of the 80s. At the time, we were told to be scared and that this is a new drug. And then we were told meth is the new drug, it's scary, we should be scared. And I think the lesson that we should learn is fear is not an emotion that is going to help us make an informed decision on this. So while we heard about planes dropping and needle
Representative
tips.
Mathias, I'm going to stop you. We're getting into what we want to discuss on Tuesday. Appreciate it, and I like swapping history books with you. You saw where I stopped this. Are we going to go into this area, or are we going to meet on Tuesday?
I had a question,
Representative
Chairman,
Shannon?
Your Honor. I had a text from a testifier out there who indicated that he signed up. I don't know if we let everyone that, I wanted to make sure that we got all the sign-up sheets and that we had all those, as opposed to, because I know that there was one that was full and then they started a new one. And I wanted to make sure that the chairman was aware that there are people out there that maybe didn't get to testify.
Thank you, and I'll clarify that, Representative Cannon. People could sign up all the way through our hearing to be on the list, and we didn't get to about a half dozen, and I've had two people, one on each side, text me and say, I have this person, but they're not on the list. So I wouldn't put anybody on the list. So we just didn't get there. We went longer than I expected to today, so we had to stop somewhere. Representative Ehart.
Mr. Chairman, similar question, might you, and maybe you know because you have information before you, because I too had received a text. Do we have anyone in the audience that had traveled far? You probably have already figured that out. It might be worth asking.
From my understanding of the list, there's no one who would not already be here that traveled just for this. Okay, that concludes our meeting. Thank you. Good job listening. Good job, all those who testified. It helped me on both sides, what you had to share.